Welcome to the Broken Tablets podcast. I am Garrett, joined with my co-host Liam, and we have a special guest today. His name is Eric. He's a friend of ours, and he so kindly decided to come on the show today. So, Eric, welcome. Thank you so much for coming
Hey,
on.
thanks for having me, you guys. Greatly appreciate you guys letting me on here to discuss history. Fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into history? What's your relation to it, and what do you do? Tell us about you, kid.
Okay, so just to start off about what I do, I work for Liberty Mutual. I am a recovery specialist, which means if someone gets hurt on the job, I investigate to determine if there's an outside party responsible, and if so, I pursue them for recovery and what we pay on the file. It sounds as interesting as it actually is. But moving on from that topic, let's talk about why I love history so much. Ever since I was a kid, my whole family's really been into history. My dad was a history major. Actually, both my uncle and my grandfather wrote books on the Civil War. In fact, my grandfather used to tour around the country and would find unmarked Civil War veteran tombs and graves, and he would try and find out who they were in order to give them a proper burial. He had done that a few times before he passed. So, it was always fun learning history from them. It's more focused on U.S. than world. However, I just had a natural love for history any way, shape, or form since probably the age of 5 or 6 when they first started teaching me.
Wow, well, that's really cool, dude.
Yeah.
No, that's yeah. I mean, I can't say that I have any family members that were that wrote any books or are actually like American heroes and went to graves and things like that. But I did have a pretty enthusiastic movie collection.
Okay.
So, that's what I have.
Oh yeah, nice.
So those of you folks at home who are wondering why Liam is going on about Hennessy is because for this podcast we are gonna take a little bit more of a casual step, whereas the
This
last
one's
time we got pretty
PG-13.
heavy talking about World War I stuff like that. This time we are going to be really kind of taking it easy and gonna have a brandy or two while we talk about the great commanders of all time, and stuff like that. And Liam went to the liquor store, and Liam, you want to go more into your Hennessy trials and tribulations?
I don't know, man. It's kind of like talking about your disappointment, son. You know, like
Okay. Brandy is supposedly an acquired taste. Maybe you just don't have that taste yet.
no, because I actually just picked up some brandy, an undetermined amount of time ago. I don't want to let you know how quickly I finished it, but it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot. And so I went to this smaller liquor store this time because I was informed that we were drinking 2 minutes into when we were supposed to be recording. And it was a smaller liquor store, and I was like, okay, I'm looking for the brandy, and they've got two. One is okay, one and a half, one and a maybe, and then one is the Hennessy, and the other one is just this unmarked bottle with like a cross on it. It looks like a holy hand grenade. It was just covered in dust. It probably was the holy hand
Why
grenade,
wouldn't you buy
but
that though? That sounds
I,
intriguing.
I, I assumed it numbered in the hundreds of
Oh,
dollars,
sure.
and
Yeah. You
Oh,
will not
okay.
see
well,
dust
I'm
in.
always one for splurging on alcohol. Like this has taught me a gosh darn lesson, hasn't it? Because I don't know, I spent $45 on this, I don't know, 750 milliliters of Hennessy, and it tastes like I said, it's like it's got the the smell sensation of when you vomit. It's got that kind of heady scent to it coming from inside your mouth.
Hmm.
Um, which I can't really highly recommend. And so it's really called into question my appreciation for the recommendations of hip hop artists. I,
Well, Hennessy, that's some pretty bad press. But if you want some good press, just feel free to sponsor us, and we'll turn that review right around.
oh yeah, straight up, if you send me free alcohol, I'll stand you all day long. I don't care how it tastes.
Also, here's a nice
uh,
little plug for Hennessy as well. If you're looking for a good way to make Hennessy taste great, try yourself a Brandy Alexander. It's a combination of Hennessy, chocolate cream liqueur, and some heavy cream, and it tastes like chocolate milk. And I give that 2 thumbs up.
Ooh, hot
Chocolate milk
dog.
with
Yeah, that's
alcohol.
what you're
That
drinking
sounds
right
kind
now,
of.
isn't it, Eric?
That it is. I mean,
Mm.
Brandy Alexander, Alexander the Great, greatest generals of all time, had to do something.
Yeah, yeah,
In
to do something
fact,
like that.
some cognac is named after Napoleon. That's like
Oh,
a degree of, um, I think it's a degree of quality in cognac.
oh wow.
This is like, again, without going into how quickly I finished my last bottle, it's like, this is a brand new for me, but I did some Googling, which is kind
I
of,
did do a solid Google search, and
which is
holy,
kind of a great segue into what we're doing today.
Right.
holy cow! Wow, look at that. It's just so natural and it slipped on like a glove. Okay, so what we're talking about today, folks, is we're talking about the greatest commanders of all time. Chances are it's going to be a two-parter. But, and this is how it works, okay? So we have two categories of questions. We have casual questions and serious questions. So for casual questions, it's just going to be us like being like, hey, who do you think was a blank kind of commander? And then we each give who we chose, why we think that general fits it, but we don't choose. We don't come to a consensus about who is the best in that category. So it's just a way for us to just kind of casually chit chat and really just kind of share what we love about military history and stuff like that. Then you have the serious questions. So the serious questions are where each of us present our candidate for who we think is, let's say, like the worst general of all time. We have we present our person, and then we talk about and then we have to pick one. So then we will have a voting session at the end, and obviously majority rules. So if Liam and I think that Julius Caesar is the best general of all time, and Eric's like, nah, willing to come to Sherman all the way, then Eric loses, we win, and that's who we loosely definitively say is the best general of all time.
Okay.
So yeah. Eric's laughing because he wanted to put Sherman for all the things.
I wish
So,
that'd be wonderful.
so it's vaguely democratic. And a note on sources: there won't be any. We didn't consult any. We know everything already. A bit on a disagreement and like a historicity of our opinions. It's a lie. We're right. You're wrong. Whatever agreement we come to is the agreement. It is the definitive test. That's all I have to say on that.
Yeah. Well, he's not
okay.
wrong. I mean, the thing is
Yeah.
that we are experts in our field. So if you disagree with us, then you can shove it, dude. That's just kind of the dealio. And if you write in the comments below that we're wrong, guess what? I'm gonna hit you with a no you, and then you've got you can't do anything about it. You got nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a
Just love
Gmail
the internet.
account. If anybody is much smarter than we are and like actually wants to engage with us and tell us how ludicrously wrong we are, but in a way that is educational, there's a Gmail account.
Yeah.
I think it's
There's a Gmail account. If you just hit
Broken
if you just
Tablets
hit with the lol, you're
Podcast at
dumb. I'm gonna be like,
gmail.com.
ooh, woo. What am I gonna do now? I don't do well with
Yeah,
criticism. I just shut down.
and just a note on quality. The two of them have researched this extensively. Me?
That's a bold statement.
I would say bold. Definitely bold.
Not as bold as the things I'll be saying today. So.
Awesome.
But
awesome.
I anticipate giving absolutely no justification for my claims. I anticipate spitballing and really rudely sticking to my opinion, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. So have at it, Chandler.
Sounds good
Have
to
All
at
me.
it.
right. Okay, so we're gonna kick this off with a very casual question, and this is one that I think we can. This is one we can all get behind. Okay, so since we are drinking at this in this little podcast of ours, I was thinking the first question we should start off is which general you would most like to grab a beer with. So Eric, you're
I'm
our
not gonna
guest. Why don't
share
you
it.
take it away?
All right. So before I answer that question, I just want to confirm something. I guess with the or the casual questions, if I say someone's name, I can use him in a serious one as well. Correct?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Well, then that makes this really easy. I picked for this one Alexander the Great.
Ooh, okay. Elaborate on that for me.
Throughout his time, his rule, his reign, the 13 years, He traveled about 2 million square miles and took over 2 million square miles. And that was back before planes. He crossed that himself. He saw the lay of the land. He saw many different people. He killed many different people. He enslaved many different people. But at the same time, it was just, I feel like just to learn about what it was like traveling just that far throughout the span of almost 13 years, just kind of what that does to a human being. And I just think that'd be really interesting to learn about.
That's a fact that I love when you're thinking back to Alexander, when you're thinking really back anywhere beyond the modern era, beyond modern transportation. You think of like many of the people we're going to have on our lists. Like we've all traveled to perhaps different countries, to perhaps different parts of the US. We've all traveled a significant distance, but to travel those distances on a horseback
Right.
or in a column of marching soldiers, that's bizarre. That is months of time traveling essentially on foot,
Exactly.
or at the speed of on foot. That's kind of amazing. Like you figure, I've gone for some pretty long walks in my time. I've gone for some 6 and 13-hour walks, but we're talking 13-hour walks every single day. There were no weekends back then. People went all the way to Asia.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
bizarre.
and just to really
So
foot slog in it, and there's no.
here's the question: what would you be drinking?
Brandy Alexander.
You think you'd go for that?
Seriously, I'm gonna plug Hennessy all day if that's the case. Yeah, I would love to meet Alexander the Great if that was somehow possible, and offer him a Brandy Alexander. Because knowing him, I believe he honestly would think that they named it after him. So definitely.
Hey, dude, can you just see the bartender be like, "Hey, dude, this is the guy that drinks it, dude. Hey, it's on the house." And he's just like,
Exactly.
"Dude, it's sick. I get it everywhere I go."
Right.
Do you think that he like knew? Of course, everybody, many of the people on our lists tonight, we're gonna consider as like people for whom it was clear to them, whether it was true or not, that they were the main goddamn character of the story.
Yep.
Like, and Alexander, without a doubt, knew that he was the main character of the story. But do you think that he knew that, I guess it's 2,500 years hence, he would still be revered as he was? Do you think
I
he
think
knew?
so.
I do, especially because from what I know about Alexander the Great, he at all times had someone following him around writing about his accomplishments. And I mean, the term Alexander the Great didn't come about after him, it came while he was still in power. So I think he, in his head, knew just how impactful he truly was.
I think since this like the sort of era we're talking about right now is where a lot of my list is going to come from. I absolutely agree. Like some of these people that we hear about, you have to wonder how much is fact, how much is fiction,
Hmm.
and of course there are some things you can't fake. But the idea of using propaganda as a tool for immortalization, just awesome. Just what a cool thing to look at.
Right.
Because like many people did that, Alexander, Julius Caesar.
Mhm.
We'll get to them.
Yeah,
Definitely.
no. They're there. They're there.
Garrett, who would you have a drink with?
Okay, mine is a fun one. So my general I chose was Ethan Allen. Do you know who Ethan Allen is?
His name rings quite the bell,
Right.
but
Ethan Allen was it was during he was a Revolutionary War commander. He wasn't I don't think he ever reached he actually was an official general, but he was in charge of what are called the Green Mountain Boys. They were responsible their big claim to fame was that they took they took Fort Ticonderoga from the British in 1775. And those guns were then hauled to Boston, where Washington put the guns on Dorchester Heights, and that's what forced the British out of Boston, effectively. Now, Ethan Allen was a rough and ready frontiersman. He was hard drinking, hard fighting, and his Green Mountain Boys, they're around like 300, 400 strong, were very loyal to him but that's not exactly why I chose him to for the general I'd get to grab a beer with. Other than the fact that the man, like literally, the stereotypical rebel. He had no fears. He had no one was going to hold him back. He was going to do whatever the hell he wanted. But I'm sure you're all familiar with the famous Abraham Lincoln story about him.
Is this? Oh yes, oh yes.
Yeah,
Please recount it for
Yes,
us in your
please.
greatest
Yeah, okay.
Garrett.
Absolutely. So, this
In
is
your
like my
greatest
favorite
Garrett way.
history story of all time, and this is one that Lincoln would tell. He's recorded of telling it numerous times. Now, whether it's real or not, I don't know because it
Who
could be just like
cares?
a
Nobody
folk
cares
tale.
anymore.
Right,
History
right,
is
right. Nobody
Also,
cares. It could
everything
just be a folk tale. But this is
everything
one
we
of the things
say
I would
here
ask
is
him.
real.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I would ask him. I would say like, "Hey, is this real?"
we
But
create reality by recounting it. So
Exactly.
continue.
exactly right. So for Ethan Allen, his what happened was that he was in England after the Revolution, and he was at an esteemed lord's house because he was, this very important commander during the Revolution, and they thought, oh well, he'll be a dignified gentleman. But of course, Ethan Allen, being the rough and ready American that he was, just was disheveled and all these things. And they said, "Oh, we'll humiliate this American." So the British put a portrait of George Washington in the bathroom, and so Ethan Allen, of course, he was enjoying himself, and then he went to relieve himself, as everyone does during a party. He goes to the bathroom, and the British are like, "Oh look, oh yes, this American will be so offended, and we would have slighted the man." And Ethan Allen comes out, and he doesn't react, and the British are just like look at him, and they're like, "Well, Mr. Allen, did you not find was your trip to the lavatory satisfactory?" And he's just like, "Yeah, it was fine." And he's just like, "Oh well, certainly. What did you think about the portrait of Washington there?" He goes, "Well, I think it's perfectly placed." And he's just like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, if you're gonna have a portrait of our general there, it's perfect because nothing makes an Englishman shit faster than than Washington himself." And it was this beautiful little thing. And I want to say, Ethan, man, did you do this? Is this true? Because if it is, that's like the most 100% Chad move.
That's the high
And
five moment.
right, I would high five the hell out of him and be like, "Yeah, screw the British."
Yeah, I wonder. You really got to wonder with a story like that. Like, assuming it's true. Like,
right.
do you think he sat on the toilet for like a little bit longer than usual to come up with that?
Yeah, right. It's like, was that a spur of the moment thing, or was that you just firing off at the hip?
Right.
I mean, men back then, especially men of prominence, had prodigious wits.
Right.
So I could absolutely imagine him coming up with that on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I also given the time, you could sit down on the toilet and look at George Washington's beautiful tiny little lips and and think about that one for a little while.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is he is just such like a fun character. You could definitely just see yourself having folk music in a bar
And Garrett, what would you be drinking with the guy?
Oh, I would be drinking just classic American whiskey, and it would burn my throat. But I'd be like, "God damn it, I'm one of the boys,"
Do you have a whiskey in mind?
Right, exactly right. No, I don't have whiskey on me right now. I'm
Okay.
actually drinking a frou-frou drink. I'm drinking I can never say it.
Disaronno.
Oh,
It's
Disaronno.
an almond liqueur.
Almond liqueur, yeah.
And I gotta say, out of all the things to drink straight, it is probably my favorite.
It does go down smooth.
But yeah, it does go down super smooth. But yeah, Liam. So who's the general you'd like to grab a beer with?
So I've actually given this one probably more thought than any of the others. And I think I've got to come up with what's kind of a cheaty answer. And it's a cheaty answer because this individual was absolutely a commander of some repute, but is better known for other work, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh,
okay.
that's a
all
great
right.
answer.
Yeah.
It's a bit cheaty. It's probably also the only other American that's going to be on my anyway, one of the only Americans on my list.
Quick course correction.
But come on, Theodore Roosevelt was. I mean, so he was reputed as one of the most badass individuals ever to hold the office of presidency. He has experience in war, so he is a soldier, he is a commander. He's okay. I won't call him the greatest diplomat, but he's a diplomat. So he's experienced in speaking with other people of his time and other nations. but most of all, and what I'd really love to do, like this is the picture I'm painting in my mind of, because he was a great naturalist and a great hunter, and he was sort of formed of tons of those beautiful contradictions. Um, he was from a young age an enfeebled aristocrat, medically, and he sort of drew out of that a sort of um, a coonskin cap wearing gruff Davy Crockett type. And of all of those contradictions, I'd love to get the measure of the man himself. So I imagine the two of us on a hunting trip, hunting God knows what, buffalo, let's hope.
Let's hope.
Buffalo, because why not? They still existed, right?
Yes.
So the two of us just kind of trudging through the wilderness. I imagine this is like totally fantastical, right? Because there are no buffalo in the forests of let's say Appalachia, but I imagine us being in the forests of Appalachia, just upon the hills on horses with our probably Winchester rifles. Is that apocryphal or no? Or sorry, is that
about you? Yeah, you
it's
probably
possible?
have you might have that or a Springfield rifle.
Okay, so we'll call them Springfields then. With our Springfield rifles, just looking for some buffalo in the forest.
Because if it's after 1903, probably a Springfield. If it was before,
I can imagine him having. He probably did brew his own brandy. I'd have to look that up. I haven't looked into that.
If there was any president who would, he would.
Oh, definitely.
Right? like I could see, like, if you really hear like some tales of Teddy Roosevelt, like the man who's just like at like 70 is like, I'm gonna go to the Amazon and kill an anaconda.
Right.
Like that's like that's literally how he died.
Right.
Was he went to the Amazon and got I think it was either like cholera or yellow fever and died.
Well, that's just exactly the way I would like to die, with Teddy Roosevelt, drinking until we're sick. Drinking until I'm sick, because I imagine the man could hold his liquor. Look at the freaking size.
I mean, the man was portly in his old age.
He was portly.
he was quite portly.
I can imagine him like brewing some kind of whiskey or moonshine of his own, and us enjoying that, me puking my brains out, and
I mean,
and us going to hunt something exotic and soon to be extinct by our beautiful hands.
And honestly, like you were saying, with just grabbing a beer with someone, or not even a beer, just a drink in general, it would be pretty cool just to hear all of those stories, the hunting stories he had throughout his time, because
the hunting
it would just
stories,
be amazing.
The diplomacy stories,
exactly.
Like.
Yeah, no, I mean the
man
was certainly able to spin a yarn. But Liam, there's actually one fun fact I wanted to throw your way, because
throw it at me.
Because you said it a little earlier, there was a when he was, because you're right, he was New York aristocracy, and so but he was trying to brand himself as this American frontiersman. And there's actually one of the first pictures he posed for that was like in his New York circuit, is him in a raccoon hat and all these lace things and stuff like that, but he's posing with a knife. Turns out the knife was from Tiffany's. and Liam, you understand, it's a nice knife. Like, it clearly took hundreds and hundreds of man hours to get the engraving on that just right. And he's like, I'm a regular frontiersman, and it's just like, that's from Tiffany's, you dumbass. And but obviously it was one of the first ones, but that was something he was very conscientious of. He's like, I don't want to be an aristocrat. I want to be one of the regular people.
So I mean, yeah, he's like a regular popolare,
right?
That's what's amazing about the man. I don't know if anyone short of Julius Caesar has really achieved that in my pantheon of historical personalities.
Yeah, like people who were of the silver spoon, but then like really like said, I'm gonna go super populist.
Right, and then just became heroes of, not just heroes of the people, but heroes of popular culture in the plebeian sense.
Yeah. No, I can't. You're right. I can't think of anybody else really.
And I love that about him, and I love his endless contradictions. I love the way he exuded kind of like a frontiersman personality in the place you would least expect to see it. Like, much has been said recently about the office of president and the austerity that you would expect from it, and kind of like when you don't get that, you kind of it's disappointed. Like there's an adjective, presidential,
Right.
Mhm.
and you would definitely say like let's go back some number of years. Like you would definitely say Franklin Delano Roosevelt was presidential.
Yeah.
You would definitely say John F. Kennedy was
Of
presidential.
course.
Mhm.
But it seems like all the acronym presidents, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
But Teddy Roosevelt, I don't think you could call him presidential.
Right.
I think you could call him kind of like he sort of forged his own path within the presidency, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Also, just since we're talking about who we'd like to share a drink with, I want to, since we're actually drinking and discussing all this, I'd like to throw a fun fact out about Teddy Roosevelt.
Ooh.
So he used to obviously hunt birds and game in the Adirondack Mountains.
Adirondack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Or-
and then at around 15, he was guided around St. Regis Lake by a man named Mose Sawyer. And in order to show his appreciation, Teddy gave him 2 stuffed birds that he preserved with arsenic. Fun little fact about this is, unfortunately, the birds and Moses' cat, which ate those birds, did not last very long.
Oh my god.
Oh, dude,
That's
that's
just
awesome.
that's just like a very morbid version of like the Winston Churchill story, right? Of him laying the bricks
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
having
yeah, yeah.
and just being just god awful at it because he'd never laid bricks in his life.
Right.
But
And
he's
then his
he's
bodyguard and his
genius and
maid
he's
had to fix it.
an aristocrat and he's expected to be good at everything upon first attempt. Oh wow! I'm glad that Churchill didn't try to preserve any birds.
Oh yeah, that would have been really funny.
And it gifted one to FDR, right?
Right, yeah. That's
It
really
wasn't
good.
polio after all.
Yeah, it wasn't enough for the man to have polio. Had to had to give him an
All right,
arsenic
hit us
bird.
with question number 2.
Okay, question numero dos. So this is one that is, again, it's still a casual question,
Okay.
but it's one that I really really enjoy, and it's who is the most overrated general of all time? Liam, why don't you kick us off with this? Who do you think is just completely overrated as a general?
So I'm gonna catch flack for this from the both of
no.
you.
Oh,
And
I know
you,
exactly what
Garrett,
you're
you
gonna say.
know where it's going because you've heard
I
it
know
before.
exactly.
Truthfully, I think I know where it's going, and I'm not happy about this, but let's hear it.
Okay. We have to consider the question. We have to consider what overrated means.
Oh my God.
Overrated does not mean not impressive. It does not mean not worthy of praise. But it means someone who has received more historical praise from in the mind of the average human being on the planet than they deserve. And in my mind, that is General George Washington.
You piece of shit.
Oh,
You knew where it was going.
man.
You knew where it was going.
And that was my guess, and I'm triggered right now.
Dude, I knew it. All right, go ahead.
All
Go
right,
ahead. Go
let
ahead.
me
Liam.
briefly defend
Explain
myself.
yourself before we tear you a new asshole.
Okay, as far as and he will crop up in places on my list that are laudatory because he does deserve praise. He was as a commander in chief, he was the perfect man for the job, without a doubt. But as a tactician, as a kind of low-level commander of men in the midst of battle, I don't think he lives up to the popular imagination of him. I think that he and even some strategic decisions of his on a higher level, even if you're to discount his kind of lower level like tactician failures, even if you're looking at him as a general, as a higher level commander, some of his strategic decisions were, shall we say, extremely questionable. The one that is my quintessential example is his constant obsession with retaking New York, even though it was not as strategically essential as he thought it was. It was really, he was looking after I think, his own legacy in that case. I think he was being selfish. I think that he did not need to take New York. I think that he wanted to rectify his own failure. And I think that okay, so let me so that's my kind of factual backup, and now my cultural backup. So when you're a kid in the United States, you grow up and you learn, the abridged elementary school version of American history. George Washington's like the guy. He's like Romulus and Remus. He's like Alexander the Great. He's like um, Solon the Great. He's like all the greats rolled up into one. When you're a kid in America, unless you paid attention in class, which was definitely not me, you know that George Washington, he fought the British single-handedly, founded America.
Wait,
He
he did?
wrote the Constitution. He wrote the Declaration. He founded the structure of the United States. He ran the Congress. He ran the judicial system. You think that he was, the great founder. He did everything. And, of course you learn about the side characters. You Benjamin Franklins, you Thomas Jeffersons, you Alexander Hamiltons. But those guys aren't George Washington. He is, without a doubt, kind of like the patron saint of the United States of America. And he just doesn't deserve all of that. And I think you guys would agree on the basic level that he definitely gets more credit than he deserves for stuff that he literally did not fucking do. Like, he was not the founder of the framer of the Constitution, or even a framer of the Constitution. Was he even at the convention? I don't think so.
He was at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yes,
was. Okay, fair. But I don't think he spoke a single time, did he?
Okay, so I have my all right, Liam, I'm letting you finish so
You're-
that I
you're-
can then rebuttal.
You're ready? I'm basically done. I'm ready for conversation
Okay,
now.
okay.
Hit me hard and watch me obstinately refuse to acknowledge your information.
So here's the thing, though, is that I will concede that from a general perspective, okay, from a purely tactical perspective, I think you are correct. George Washington was not tactically a very gifted commander. His ability as a general was much more in inspiring loyalty from the troops, and really keeping the army alive and together. There is after the Battle of Valley Forge, for example, or Battle of Valley Forge, encampment at Valley Forge, and then after the Battle of Trenton, you had a situation where a lot of the veterans, their commissions were up, and Washington addresses the men and says, "Look, I don't know how to spare you, but your country really needs you now, and I understand that we can't pay you. But if you really believe in the cause, then you need to. It's like you need to stick to the course. And if you do this, I will find you more money." So he offers them $10. Does he have the $10? He doesn't, but he says this. For this money, which is at $10 at the time, was more than a month's salary.
Right.
So he was like, "Look, if you do this, Congress will honor this agreement, and you will get this money." They eventually did, to my knowledge, but it did take some time. Because obviously, when you're running a government where you can't tax any states, you don't have any money.
I also, it's probably that they were paid. I think they were paid in greenbacks, which had to develop.
Well, yeah, it was useless. But my point is that Washington, as a general, his ability to understand the men and to really keep the army together is, I would argue, more important than being tactically sound. Because without Washington there, the army doesn't come together. And
I completely agree.
And the second, to address the second point you have, because I think Eric's going to piggyback onto a few other points
Potentially,
because I can feel him chomping at the bit here. So this is my last point to refute. So at the Constitutional Convention, there are two people, because again, at being the major nerd that I am, I've actually studied the Constitutional Convention minutes, and there are two prominent members that say nothing. The first is Washington, and the second is Benjamin Franklin. both of these founding fathers say nothing during the Constitutional Convention because they know that if they say something that's for this or against this, then you are the person who's against Washington or against Franklin, and it kills open debate. So Washington, he is the president of the convention, but he serves more as a moderator. He makes sure that the debate is open and fair, and he knows that by the fact of him being him, if he says anything, all of a sudden he will shut down debate and be like, oh well, Washington said this is the case, so we're just going to go with what he says because he's George frickin' Washington. So
Yes.
that's why I believe he didn't say anything, and that I think is just a testament to for him to have the self-awareness to know. He's like, I'm sure he had opinions and ideas, but
Yes.
he didn't say it because he knew that that would not be constructive.
Definitely. Okay, so before Eric responds, and I'm like thrilled to hear his response.
Okay.
I want to not refute, but clap back on some of these.
Okay, clap back away.
Because, okay, let me first say that I 100% agree. It is difficult to overstate how important it is for a general to be, or a commander in general to be, an inspirer of men. Because that is really your first and foremost duty. It is the sine qua non of being a commander of men. And it's so basic that if you're extremely talented at it, you can have incredible results no matter your tactical brilliance. And I think that was the case with George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And he was definitely a man acutely aware of his own space in history. You know, the Hamilton song does well by "History has its eyes on you."
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent line. Like that's true, and he absolutely felt those eyes, and was keenly aware of them, and did his best in light of having those eyes on him. However, what you're describing effectively, and allow me to be polemical, is a mascot, a cheerleader.
Oh, you fucker.
Oh.
Effectively, what you're saying is Washington maybe wasn't strategically or tactically brilliant, but he was an incredible mascot / cheerleader. And you're right. And without him, we may not have had this great nation we have today, where we all live. But this is not about the work of a mascot or a cheerleader. Insofar as a commander is a mascot and a cheerleader, and that is an important role, perhaps the basic first role. He was a genius. He was a prodigious commander in that respect. But as far as everything else that goes along with command, that is not leading your men into early graves. That is actually what consists of giving orders and creating positive results for your side. I don't think that he deserves the hype he gets. Eric, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eric, are you gonna take this one?
Yeah, I got this.
Blow it away.
Okay,
I
go,
have
go,
this.
go, go, go.
So I
do it.
first just want to say, Liam, when you first pled your case, I listened, and the more you spoke, the more I thought, you know what, he has a point. He has reasoning behind it. Do I agree? No, but to each their own. Then you use the term mascot / cheerleader, and I just can't. Listen, okay, so here's my thoughts. Now, do I truly believe George Washington was the best general or commander in the history of the world? I don't. I think he is a great general, great commander. He should be in lists of top 10, but number one, maybe not. Overrated, though, however. Listen, so we are all taught, the three of us were all taught growing up, like you said, that he did all of this. He was the best. He was the greatest. They always have to put someone in the front lines to give you someone to back, but such as Christopher Columbus. We were all taught growing up that he was a great human being and he was smarter than everyone else and thought the world was round. And then you get a little bit further into Christopher Columbus and you realize how terrible a human being he was. My whole thought is we were taught because we are Americans that George Washington was this. I don't think throughout the world George Washington is touted quite the same way. So I'm going to say I can't see him as overrated because I'm sure in England they probably don't talk about George Washington the same way that we do.
That's a great point.
That's a good point.
And then, go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off,
Mhm.
Eric. I just have to throw in the asterisk there
Yep.
that I think to suggest that George Washington is effectively through propaganda
Hmm.
is this is the same is effectively gotten the same treatment as Christopher Columbus. I think is not entirely a fair comparison.
No, I wouldn't myself say that directly. I was just trying to
No,
make
I know
some
what you
type.
mean.
Yeah,
You're trying to illustrate a
yeah,
point.
I definitely 100% do not want to try and compare George Washington to Christopher Columbus. There are huge, major differences between the two. I do not like Christopher Columbus. George Washington is a hero of mine, so I will not. I apologize to you as well, Garrett, for that.
Oh no 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 no
Well,
no no no! You don't have to
yeah,
apologize to me for squat. I mean,
right.
again, and I think for those listening
Hmm.
here, we are not ignoring the fact that George Washington owned slaves,
Right.
and his false teeth were made of of from the teeth of slaves.
Mhm.
I'm not
What
ignore.
the
We're not.
fuck?
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't know that?
Oh,
No,
Oh
Jesus
yeah, no,
Christ,
I'm
they're
not.
not
No 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 no
wooden?
no. Those
yeah. They were not
that's where
made
they're
of
made from.
wood. They were not made of
Yeah,
wood.
yeah. Well, right. The teeth were not made out of wood. It was a wooden denture frame with
Yep.
human teeth in it. Human
Hmm.
teeth came from slaves.
What?
Yeah,
Okay.
Did they just
dude,
like
what you didn't
pull
know
them
Okay.
that?
out?
Dude,
Did they
I'm
just
not
pull them out?
ignoring that at all. But there
No, no,
are
no, no, no. Like,
things.
wait. Walk me through this.
Mhm.
Like, did they walked up to a slave and they were like, yeah, that's about the right size. They brought him into a room and they ripped out his teeth.
Look, I honestly don't know the
They
specifics
didn't
of it.
take it
All
from
I
dead
know
folks, and
is
they
that that
didn't take
happened.
out the decaying teeth. So, holy shit! Oh my God, George Washington was a Mad Max villain. Oh
Well,
my
dude,
God.
I think that's the thing. I don't know the specifics. Literally this was literally a headline article in in like, I don't know, maybe like New York Times or something. I just saw it as like passing thing, and I'm like, yeah, all right, I guess so.
Right.
Like it just kind of like, all right, I didn't like go into it. I guess I could, but now
Holy
I'm really
crap.
curious.
Okay, and then I guess
Um,
That's
another thing I wanted to
terrifying.
talk about, because if we keep on this topic of teeth, it's
right,
gonna go down a very random rabbit hole. So let's try and get
right.
back.
Okay, okay,
So when it comes to George Washington, another reason why I don't think he was overrated is because most of the greatest leaders, they felt themselves to be the greatest of all time, and that's not who George was. He was kind of forced to be the commanding officer. And then when he finished the war, he didn't want to be president. The people made him president, and I feel like that kind of showed his modesty in it. And I don't know if that's really going to prove whether or not he's overrated, but I think that should be something to consider. That he himself never put himself on that pedestal. He just wanted to kind of be his own man, and I think that kind of speaks volumes to who he was as a character, and like his just how good a person he was. So that, and also I'm just still mad about the cheerleader comment. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go off this rant now.
Okay, I definitely agree. I was being unnecessarily polemic and provocative when I said that. Um, and I agree. Like, as it's true, definitely and without a doubt, as a leader, the even though you could describe it with the compound adjective do nothing, um, it was well thought out. It was brilliant, and as a leader, he absolutely deserves those accolades. And I
Mhm.
agree, the Cincinnatus aspect to him, that giving up of what could have easily become dictatorial power, um, was was legendary and is legendary, and he perhaps deserves that legendary status. But Cincinnatus is also not on my list, and I doubt he's on your lists either,
Fair.
because him giving up power does not make him a great commander. And I definitely agree. Like, that's definitely on his leadership chops. Like, one day I hope we can return to this like sort of a topic
Right.
and do it with leaders in general, like non-military leaders or
Okay.
yeah, okay, that's a
diplomats,
good idea.
or
That'd be nice.
because I mean, firstly, I'm immensely enjoying this. I've learned that as horrible as Hennessy tastes in the nose,
Yep.
it gets you fucked up real
Yes, it
fast.
does. Yes, it
Um,
does.
that's where I'm at right
Another
now.
plug for
Nice.
Um,
Hennessy.
Well.
yes,
Mhm.
sorry, my generalized, and Garrett, I'll let you can go in 2 seconds.
Okay, yeah,
But
you're good.
generally, I won't say I'm 100% convinced as a commander. of men in a military setting. I'm not especially sure that I am convinced, but I do appreciate that he deserves a spot on top 10 lists,
Oh,
without a doubt.
okay.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And he's
So
not
just
just a
to
cheerleader.
clarify, okay. So I'm looking at an article that's it's by Live Science, but it has
Please
data
tell me you're coming back to the
from the
TA.
Mount
Yep.
Vernon Ladies Association.
Holy
Okay.
Yep.
shit, thank you.
I looked it up because I want to I don't want to spread misinformation here. So apparently, he had his some of his he had a few sets of dentures. Some of them were made of the rims were made of certain metal alloys, and some of the teeth were made with ivory, which
Okay.
makes a lot of sense.
That
But
does
he
make
did have a couple, set or two of teeth, with teeth procured from possibly slaves or poorer people, and he paid them for it. That's what he did. So
Ugh.
Okay,
right. So
honestly though,
there's a
that's
quote.
like
There's a quote from
uh-huh.
one of the members of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association saying George Washington probably gave his inaugural speech with teeth that were from people who were enslaved. And she says it's grim.
Okay, so to be fair, like as far as things go for a slave, like okay, it's a different thing, and I think it's like a significant ethical difference. Like if you pay what are you like paying the slave, like I don't know if slaves could really own property in such a sense. I mean, that's up to the slave owner, but if if you're taking a tooth from a slave and then giving him his freedom, like I I doubt that that's the way it went because that would be an extremely expensive way to
Nah,
get fake teeth.
he underbought him.
Ooh, okay, that's a little bit fucked.
Just
But
a little bit.
ivory makes sense, but
Yeah.
okay, so the real main takeaway for me from what you just said is he had different sets of teeth, which to me confirms that he had grills. He was like, again, a hip hop artist. I wonder if he drank Hennessy.
Hear me? It's like hear me out here, hip hop artist.
Like if he were alive today, he'd probably have grills.
He would
right?
drink Hennessy.
He would drink Hennessy.
Yeah, he would just drink straight Hennessy.
I imagine so. I mean, I wonder this all the time actually. Like if like Napoleon or like other people who may appear on our lists, like if these great men of history were if they were alive today, like what would their relationship be with celebrities? Like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Would George Washington listen to Kanye West? Like maybe.
Thanks, Kanye. Very cool.
Okay, so that's enough on George Washington for
Wow,
now.
that was
For
we
now.
literally spent like 20
That
minutes
was
on like one
well
person.
because I think two of us were extremely heated by that answer.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
That's
that was
good.
that,
That's
was
good.
a
I
bit,
think
that was a bit of a
good
that was a
thing.
bit of a
I'm glad I
provocative
brought up a
statement.
controversial
All right,
answer
Eric,
to that
who do you think is the most overrated general?
So I'm gonna be honest with both of you. Mine does not have a lot of backing. It is just a personal opinion, and
Sure.
That's what we're doing.
perfect.
That's what we're doing.
That's
We
what
don't
we
give a
are.
shit.
100% most overrated is Napoleon.
What the shit?
Yep.
Okay, well, all right, back this up for me.
All right.
Okay. So so I mean throughout
Yeah, you start speaking, Eric.
throughout the Napoleonic era and his wars, he truly just showed he had no remorse and and I don't mean in regards of cruel. He did not care for his soldiers in the slightest throughout. Yeah,
What?
I'm sorry. He had over 2 decades. He had some 5 million soldiers and sailors of his own killed just because he just wanted to win a couple of wars. And another reason why I don't like him is just because he's French. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but
All right. That criticism is valid 100%.
Wow, dude. The
Wait,
thing
wait.
is
Okay,
that,
actually,
Eric, the British part of me
Yep.
just started giggling on the inside.
well,
I
Like,
will
wow, that's
say
just stuck at France.
you deserve to qualify that one iota. He was Corsican.
He
Fair enough.
was Corsican.
Fair enough. I mean, that's all fair. It's just I don't know. I've always had this feeling towards Napoleon. Don't get me wrong; he's a great military mind. All of that. everything you look up online. It's who are the greatest generals of all time. Number one is always Napoleon. Number one is always Napoleon. And I feel like someone needs to put him in his place. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm here to do today because I have
Oh,
no evidence. I have no backing towards this. I'll allow both of you to attack me for that. I know this is a hot take, but that's where I'm going. It's like saying LeBron James
hot
isn't.
take is freaking
Yeah,
volcanic, is what it
it's like
is.
saying LeBron James isn't good at basketball. It makes no sense. There's
Well,
no
he's not.
backing, but here I'm going to say it, and that's just my opinion.
Okay, let me be the first one to respond because my response is going to be brief and uneducated.
Okay.
Um, and Garrett's is going to be lengthy and
Yes,
well researched.
of
You
course.
got that
Okay.
right.
Okay. My basic response, is you're right. He gets immense hype, and I wish he won, even though he speaks the dreaded tongue of the French. He is okay. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here, and like the only real gripe I have with what you said
Mhm.
is he didn't care for his soldiers. A general who care or a commander, because I hate the term general
Fair.
because I think admirals deserve places on these lists.
Okay.
Oh
Um,
yeah, but I didn't.
and
Yeah, I didn't put.
and commanders in
Dumbass.
chief.
Hmm.
Anyway,
That's fair. That's fair.
I think land battles for some reason they're just like so human and so like close quarters, at least
Hmm.
previously, that we view them with like we give them more credence than we do naval battles. But anyway, leaving that all aside, I think a general or a commander that cares too much for his soldiers doesn't win conflicts. If you're worried about losing soldiers, then you will not win because you can't make calculated sacrifices. If Hannibal didn't sacrifice many soldiers in the center of his line, he would not have been able to perform any kind of encirclement tactics.
Yep.
And that goes for everyone.
Yep.
Like, I mean, he may have had more of a disregard for his soldiers than normal, but he wasn't a let's say like he wasn't a Soviet general,
Right.
because the Soviet were notoriously ruthless. They were even more ruthless than the Tsarist forces
Right.
in
Yep.
terms of just throwing unprepared individuals as cannon fodder and feeding the meat grinder
That's
with
fair.
more than it can handle.
And honestly, like I said, my whole reasoning for Napoleon is completely there's no evidence, there's no historical background. It was literally just me being like, you know what, I don't like Napoleon, so there it is. So that what you said makes a lot of sense.
You know, we
Mhm.
should have a question for who you would least like to grab a beer with.
And
I
I
mean,
think
okay,
that'd
to
be
be
it.
fair,
I think that'd be more this
Napoleon,
answer.
I would absolutely grab a beer with Napoleon, or rather a cognac with Napoleon, a Napoleon cognac, because he'd be thrilled to know that they named cognac after him. I'm sure. He'd be pissed that there weren't any cities, or as far as I know, no cities. There should be more cities. But okay, Garrett, I'm ready.
Oh no.
I'm ready. Let's go for it.
Look, I have Napoleon somewhere else later on my list, so I'm not gonna dig into Eric here. I'll dig into him then.
Okay.
But
Oh, come on,
with
give us a taste.
Yeah, just a little bit. I need.
well, okay, if I have to. All right. So Napoleon completely defined or redefined warfare for the next 100 years. This man created
I'm gonna have to
tactics.
check you on that. What
Oh, you don't have. You feel free to, but I'm telling you, you don't have to,
Napoleonic
man.
Wars were when?
So the
He died in
Napoleonic Wars were
1840.
between 1805 and 1815. Okay,
Okay.
those tactics were used up
Until
until
World War
War
One. You're right.
in which
Okay,
they're
so
like, oh
100 years
well,
works perfectly.
we can now kill people from miles away.
Say 99, but good.
Okay, look, listen here, you little shit. is that Napoleon? Yes, so he had tactically right. You had the Napoleonic tactics, which did define warfare for the next 100 years. The big kicker though, and this is something that we still use today that Napoleon developed in 1805, is the core system.
Yeah.
We still use the core system today. The whole idea of having small autonomous armies that converge all in one spot, that was all him.
That's
the
fair.
amount of military ingenuity and genius this guy has is so much more than almost any other contemporary general. It's not even funny.
Fair.
So he
This
was an
guy had this.
organizational genius, maybe.
Right, he was an
Right.
organizational genius, but it
Yep.
goes even beyond that. If you look at how he in military uh, uh, I guess doctrine, you have this principle of concentration of force, where Napoleon where you need to have more force or more momentum in in your army against the other in order to win. That's effectively how
Right.
you move troops to win
Of
battles.
course.
Napoleon said, what happens if you're outnumbered? Because if you're outnumbered, obviously there's no way that you can get enough momentum to win. So what he does is actually galaxy brain, and he wins a lot of his battles this way because he oftentimes had a smaller force, contrary to popular belief. So he would have, like, say, against the Prussian forces in like the mid 1807 and stuff like that, that would march against it. They would deploy their battle line. Say they had 15,000 troops, so they had 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, and 5,000 in 3 blocks across the line. Napoleon might only have 1,000 troops, so he has 2 blocks of 500. Okay, so what he would do is that he would then move all his troops again. Maybe maybe 1,000 is a bit too small. Maybe, like, let's just say 10,000. So he has 5,000. He has 2 blocks of 5,000. The enemy has 3 blocks of 5,000. What he would do is that in the middle of the night, he would weaken his flanks, so they would have maybe only 2,500, 2,500, and then he would move the beginning. So you have 7,500 in the middle, and then he would push in the middle, and to do that all overnight into one push. I'm sorry, that's a galaxy brain play. Again, I'm a little tipsy right now, so my numbers might not add up correctly, but that's what he did.
Hey,
Okay.
before we move any further forward, Garrett, I have a quick question for you. Are you more heated with me than you are with Liam about George Washington?
Yes, because the thing is that on some level, Liam was right.
Mhm.
You're just wrong here, bud. I'm
That's,
sorry.
I mean, that's fair. Again, I feel like these are the casual conversations, right? About, who I think is overrated. And the only, I think
No, yeah. And
I,
honestly,
mhm, mhm,
on some level, I do hear you that,
yep,
he is a bit overrated,
right.
and does he live up to the hype? But I'm sorry. Tactically speaking, this man, or we still use the organizational system that Napoleon uses.
Fair enough.
And to say that that is not worth the hype, I think you are minimizing.
Well,
Is
that's the thing. I wouldn't even say that it's not worth the hype. I don't want to minimize what he's done. Again, like I said, I have no historical background or evidence on this.
Sure, right?
It's more just because literally everything I looked up on who are the best generals of this and that, everything is Napoleon. And I just feel like there are some people who deserve maybe some credit in areas in regards to potentially being innovative or a better tactician, and that's my only basis off it. It's not to it literally just to clear the air for everyone. It is not to say that Napoleon wasn't good at what he did. He was remarkable at what he did. He is one of again, I'd put him maybe on that top 10 list of greatest all time. Just for me to see that everyone puts him at number 1 for the most part, I just have to disagree with that. That's really the only basis.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to
Well,
upset
There
anyone.
is.
I understand
Like,
how amazing he truly is, but continue.
all I'm saying is that, like, like, I hear your argument,
Hmm.
but it's I disagree with it fundamentally,
Fair enough.
only on the grounds that, like, it's like saying that we should praise, like, that we shouldn't praise Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant because like I don't know, like Rajon Rondo needs a little bit of it's like, oh, well, he's a good player too.
I like the fact that you
We should
brought a
hey let's
basketball
not
reference into this. I appreciate that.
well, yeah, well, because
yeah,
you
that
brought
is
up LeBron James
totally
earlier, and
Right,
I think
yeah.
LeBron James is pretty overrated. I mean, he literally just charges in and, like, that's all he does. But
Hmm.
my point is like, I'm sorry, Kobe is way better. But
Right.
but anyway, my basketball hot takes aside, is that for me, that's what I hear the argument as. I
Hmm.
hear the argument as, oh well, there are other generals who's like they're important too, but, like, but I'm sorry, it's like you can't compare Napoleon to Rajon Rondo. You can't compare Napoleon to like Admiral Nimitz, right? You can't compare the
Oh,
two.
okay, yeah, and that's not where I'm going at. But I say when it comes to the only reason, and just again, just to clear the air for all the listeners out there, just to know, I am not trying to do that. I'm not gonna compare Napoleon to George McClellan. Like that's not what we're doing here.
Right,
This
right.
is me saying, it's basically saying, look, everything I see puts him at number one, and I just feel like there are other generals who might pass that. You could say Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. You could say Hannibal Barca. It's just that was my only concern. It's the fact that a lot of people I feel dismiss some of those prior to him, like the more the ancient commanders and leaders, and I feel like some of them should maybe be recognized above him. That's my only reasoning for it. Again, no historical background here. Please do not attack me. It's just my opinion. But yeah, so
Wow.
that's my thought on it.
Whew, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
all 12
Congratulations, Eric. You
listeners
got
take
tipsy
note.
Garrett to like actually like hog out a little bit. I was like, oh, this
Yeah,
motherfucker.
no, that's not. And again, I mean, that's why when Liam said George Washington, at first I was upset, but I listened to what he said and I was like, okay, it's fair. He's just saying he's overrated. Again, with Napoleon, I'm not saying he wasn't one of the greatest of all time. He's up there 100%. There's no question about that. There's a little bit too much hype in my eyes for it. That's all.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Okay. Well, compared to the two of you, I don't have nearly a big enough hot take, and I'm afraid that for the listeners at home, this is going to be pretty tame. But
Wait. One thing,
Hmm.
what
what's that?
I just want to bring something up.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I cut out.
Okay.
You've actually given me a great idea. So there's a subfield of economics called organization theory,
Sure.
and I'd love to look at cores, just like the idea of cores
Hmm.
as
Oh, well, like as a military formation.
Right.
yeah, just like through the lens of organization theory. That's it.
Oh
That's it.
wow.
Go
Okay.
Garrett. Go Garrett.
All right. Yeah. So right. So no, that would be Liam. I'd love that conversation. So for my overrated general, I actually have someone who Eric might take affront to it. I don't think so,
Okay.
but Liam will just be like tell me more.
Mhm.
And that is actually Patton.
Okay.
Really
Okay.
takes okay. Here's my reasoning. Okay, so Patton as a general, his whole shtick is just I'm gonna throw tanks at it and go fast. It's the same reason why I don't think Admiral Nimitz is necessarily a great commander because it was so one-sided it actually hurt. There was there's no Erwin Rommel Desert Fox tactics where he's like swerving around people and outflanking things and really outwitting his opponent. He just had more stuff and he just had the military superiority because he had more stuff and he threw it at the enemy or he went around the enemy very simply and smooth brain, but yet he's like, I'm the greatest of all time. So I think Patton is just a bit overrated and not entirely. I don't know. I just don't think he's necessarily worth the hype.
Oh, okay. So I'll take this one to start, Liam, if that's okay. I'm not gonna go off. I'm trying to hold my tongue on this one. I
Cut
understand.
loose, Eric. Just cut
I
loose.
understand what you're saying, but the dude was just an amazing human being. Let me explain. He's had some issues. I get that. He, like you kind of said, he threw tanks at things, but he was one of the most gifted at how to handle tanks in war at the time. That's one of the reasons why he succeeded so well. And just one thing I think I love about him, and maybe this is something you disagree with, but I love the idea of brute force and ignorance, and he was just so good at it. He was so offensive. Sometimes a good defense is having no defense and just attacking and plowing right through, and he was amazing at that, and it helped him win a lot of battles. And I'm not going to go much further than that, Garrett, because I think you read me enough about Napoleon that you know what, I'm going to let this one slide. But I disagree with you on not just a
Eric, stand your
well,
ground,
here's the
man.
thing.
Go on.
I'm gonna disagree with you on not just a fundamental level, but almost a friend level, I'm going to disagree
Oh.
with you. No,
Okay, all right, go for
he
it.
was just cool too. I mean, he was known for carrying
It's
pistols with
cool,
ivory
man.
handles. Like, what's wrong with
That
that?
he
Like,
then used the pistol whip his soldiers when they were suffering PTSD. What's your point?
you know more about history. That's my point, and I'm not going to try and sound like an idiot in front of you. But I don't know. I feel like he was. Yes, he was. He knew a lot about tanks, like you said.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like he had that competitive advantage because he knew more about how to properly use, not just properly use a tank, but tactfully use it in order to win in battle versus people he went up against. So,
You know what?
yep.
I respect your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that if you're just simply for going for the rule of cool,
Mm-hmm.
there really are a few generals that really embody the rule of cool more than Patton.
Yeah.
However, for me, I don't often, at least when it comes to generals, like, don't get me wrong,
Right.
I do things for the rule of cool, but for my generals, I generally don't.
Can I be
Well,
honest?
here's a
Oh,
question.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So here's a question. I want to hear from Garrett. Like, I want to hear your. So the lot of us, we've all three of us made very controversial statements for this answer. Do you so the two of us went through why we think he's overrated. You could say he's good or he's bad or whatever, but like, is there some piece of media? I mean, there's the movie, there's the book, but like, is there some piece of media or some piece of popular imagination that you think is unfounded, or that portrays Patton as more than he was?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm trying to really think because I haven't seen I mean, I know there's a film Patton, but I've never actually sat down and watched it.
Right. I believe there's a book as well.
So right, I mean, like there was a documentary series on History Channel. It was called Patton 360.
Okay.
Right.
And I watched all of that, and it just made it seem like it was a tactical genius. But again, the more I looked at it, I was like, the only thing this guy does is throw tanks at a problem. Like
But is
that was
that a
always
bad
like that was
thing?
always when I came. I was like, there was never
Is
innovative
that
tactics, or there wasn't like it wasn't even like he's like, oh well, I'm gonna flank around and because like not every battle needs to have crazy smart tactics, but again, it was always just like I'm gonna charge it and shoot it until it dies. Like that was always his like his default, and I'm like, that's just not.
so? Okay, this is bringing me to a weird place that I'm gonna talk about for like half a second.
Okay.
And okay, there's a world of competitive Pokemon, right? It's not a world that I'm a part of. It's not a world that I'm a part of, but it's a world that I have in my most bored of bored. It's a world that I have looked into.
Okay.
and there is a dialogue on spamming. Like, it makes perfect sense to spam some moves
Yeah.
sometimes. And it's just like the correct thing to do, even if it's kind of boring. Like, would you go so far as to say that, let's say, Chinggis Khan, would you say that he spammed horse archers?
Well,
Those were just
yes,
his
but
units.
that's not my point. Genghis
Okay.
Khan was a. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you're saying like,
Yeah.
well, it's the objectively right thing to do, so shouldn't
Right,
you
like
just do the
even though it's
objectively right
maybe a
thing to do?
boring tactic, like does it really speak to a tactical unimaginativeness, or is it just him doing the right thing even though it might be boring?
The thing is, Liam, and I think it does attribute to fundamental unimaginativeness because there were instances in especially like when he was going through Sicily and when he's going through Italy, where it makes more sense to where his initial tactic of just throwing tanks at things doesn't work, but he kept doing it anyway. So his sub commanders had to find a solution where he didn't.
Okay.
And so
In
for
that
me,
case,
it's like I
would say
hear
you're
what you're
right.
saying, and yes, it's like Genghis Khan is because he spammed horse archers, but again, that's because that's all he had to do.
Right.
Which is why, like, same thing with like Admiral Nimitz. Oh, lol, I just spam aircraft because that's all I have to do.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, like, the real question I had was really like whether there was a time in which Patton, I mean, a time or a number of times that were important in which, like, his reliance on, let's say, tanks, which is what you said,
yeah,
um, whereas that hindered him. Like, because if you have an overwhelming, like, let's say you're in playing Super Smash Bros. Or something, and I
yeah,
hope this is a relatable metaphor, and you
more or less.
have that,
To me, it
and you
is.
have the hammer, right?
Yeah,
Like, you have the hammer.
yeah.
You're just fucking shit up. Um, like, is there a time where that hurt his army rather than helped it? And if so, and if it's not like an isolated, fringe incident, if it was a pattern in which, like, having this hammer of just superior tanks, like, it was the wrong choice, and not just for an efficiency perspective, but from a tactical, like, winning perspective, it wasn't the way, then I would agree with you in the sense that it was, an over reliance rather than just a perfectly germane but maybe overkill strategy.
Honestly, Liam, I don't know Patton well enough to really point to any specific instance. I do know it
Fair
happened
enough.
at places. The only place I can really think of is Monte Cassino.
Hmm.
But
Of course, the Italians would name a city that. Jesus
well, it's not a
Christ.
city. Okay. It was not a city.
Monte
It was not.
Casino, the mountain casino. Come,
Yeah,
everybody. Have some pasta and meatballs. Have some
have some
wine.
pasta and meatball and gamble your money. No, no, it was Monte Cassino was actually a monastery that was at the top of a valley, and and effectively, and it was to the point where tanks could not go up the hill. They could not do it. So Patton just said, "Fine, just let's throw the infantry at it." And the infantry walked, and they got slaughtered. And effectively, they took it because the Germans ran out of ammunition. Effectively, is what happened. So it's one of those instances where it's like, look, there was obviously a better way around it, but you didn't do it.
Gotcha.
So so yeah, it's just and again, that's the only singular instance I can think of. But I do know this is something that he did if not more than once, then a couple times more.
Okay.
Okay. That's
So
that's
that's
fair.
where my gripe is. Wait, so did
That's
everybody? I
fair.
think everybody went. Wow, that was a long
I
question.
was gonna say that was a half hour or more
Yeah,
question.
that was a half
But you
hour.
know what?
It's fine.
that's good.
Right.
No,
Like,
no, that
these
is
Exactly.
honestly
casual
went by
questions
and
are
I
the
didn't even
ones,
notice.
like,
So
we
We made
can
enemies
use
along the
about.
way with one another. I think that's a good thing.
okay, so now we're getting to the serious questions. So just a recap and refresher for all those involved and all those listening, that we are going to we're going to answer our prompt with whoever we choose for whatever question, and then we and then at the end, once we all give our deliberation, we then vote for who we think should be best.
Okay.
Yes.
I
All
like
right.
it.
Sounds good.
All right. So, who do you think, gentlemen, is the? I'm trying to pick one that's a good one to kick off a serious question. All right, let's do this one. Who do you think is the most charismatic commander?
Holy shit.
Oh,
You choose who starts this one.
All
You want to
right.
start? You
Well,
start.
yeah,
You should start.
I'll
okay.
kick it off. I haven't kicked one off yet. I chose William Tecumseh Sherman for this one. And the
Ooh.
reason why I chose William Tecumseh Sherman here, as opposed to, like perhaps a general who was, a best tactician, because he was a good tactician,
Hmm.
or even you could even say like best general of all time, arguably. But the reason why I chose him here is because he was somebody who wholeheartedly built his career on his personality. He obviously his most famous his biggest claim to fame is his march from Atlanta to the sea.
Yeah.
So Atlanta to Savannah, and that was an operation that nobody thought was a good idea. His best friend, Ulysses S. Grant, who was his commanding officer, did not think it was a good idea. Abraham Lincoln, who had an election that year, was like, "That's a bad idea. If we lose, then you will. Then effectively, I lose the election because I lost a whole army, lost in the Confederacy." But he had enough charisma and to convince Grant and Lincoln that it was something he could pull off. And I think that's just a testament to his personality as a general. But that charisma also bled over to the men. So he was a general who was very, very, very careful with the men that he served with. He would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning to listen to enemy movements. He wanted to make sure he wasn't surprised because at the Battle of Shiloh, when he was serving under Grant, the whole army was surprised in the early morning, and he goes like, "I'm never letting that happen again." So he would wake up at 3 or 4 and he would just poke the fire and really listen to see if he could hear any movements. Um, and he also didn't fight unless he absolutely had to, which tells the men that they're very careful with their lives. And the men really respected that about him. So he never put his army in a situation where they either would not perceivably lose or it would not be unnecessarily dangerous. He was, effectively where Napoleon kind of like, he did not believe in the whole men are the coin of battle. He didn't believe that at all. So that's why I put him as the most charismatic, in that he was able to do things that really convince people that he couldn't do it, and then to pull it off. Really is why I put him there.
Okay, so Garrett pulled at my heartstrings here, which is very unfortunate because I know we have to pick a clear consensus winner. And unfortunately, like he said earlier today, William T. Sherman is personally just in my mind one of the greatest generals of all time, leaders, whatever you what have you. So I don't have much to really bash in this regard, so I understand where you are coming from. So if Liam, if you have anything to say to kind of put Garrett in his place, go for it. I don't have much on this one.
No, because you guys, and I'm thrilled to have you both,
Mhm.
in the sense that my knowledge of American history is anemic at best, and the two of you seem like you have a real love and appreciation for it, which I don't have, but which I thoroughly respect.
Okay.
I don't know enough about William Tecumseh Sherman. All I know is that if your last name's Sherman, Southerners still don't like you too much. They still look at you sideways.
That's true.
Seriously,
Very fair.
it's true. Like I've met some very, very kind and very lovely people from the South of the United States, and they do indeed not hang out with you if your name is Sherman. They look at you sideways. But yeah, as far as my knowledge goes, it's lacking at best.
Okay.
It's really, really, really pathetic.
All
And
right,
so
well, that's fair. So that's just my case for Sherman. So Liam, why don't you go next? Who's you think is your most charismatic general?
okay, I have to say Napoleon. And I know he has just received a bit of a, and I'm so sorry if I come across a little bit distracted. I'm trying to fill a fountain pen right now, and I've just gotten ink all over my fingers.
Oh no.
It's a real disaster.
Liam, why are you doing that right now?
I was taking notes.
Oh, dude, I'm
Okay,
sorry. That's
I
awful.
think it's fine. I think it's fine. I just like overreacted to something. Like the tabs didn't seem lined up, but it's like fine anyway. And I do just like really have now ink all over my fingers.
Well, if you
Anyway,
want, I can cut this part out and then you can wash your hands.
Fuck it, we'll do it live, right?
Yeah, man, fuck it.
Oh, I just don't actually want to get any ink on my mug that I'm drinking brandy out of.
Sure.
Because that would be a real shame. It's got a pug on it. It's
Yep.
awesome. Anyway, okay. So I think it's Napoleon, and here's the reason. Okay. So my primary frame of reference, like everything that everybody has like a center for their historical knowledge,
Sure.
and my historical knowledge is centered in Rome. And especially in the late Republic, because that's probably the area of history that I know the most about.
Sure.
And the area, I mean, the amount that I know about it is truly pathetic and really worthy of ridicule. But it does form the center for my historical knowledge, and everything radiates from Rome for me. And for you, maybe everything radiates from America, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. but it's just like I have a different perspective. So like all of my heroes and all of my references are Roman usually. And so when I look at a person like Napoleon, I look at a lot of what we'll call usurpers
Okay.
throughout Roman history, and I'll count anyone in that who was declared Ave XYZ, declared as Caesar, and then had to fight a war to actually achieve that role. So like let's say Ave Garrett, and then your legions in Germania or something are like Ave Garrett, and you're like, all right, sweet, I'm the new emperor. I'm gonna go march on Rome, and I'm gonna become emperor. There are an absurd number of those throughout Roman history, and Napoleon, he really followed that mold in a way. But the fact that Napoleon, after being absolutely defeated and exiled to an island, and then came back to France, just swaggered his way back into Paris. It's very interesting, actually. I was trying to back up what I was saying, and that's why I was writing, and that's why my hands are now covered in ink.
Sure.
I was trying to really look back into the return of Napoleon and what led up to the 100 Days War. So he stole away on a ship, and he avoided I think Norman parts of France, and he got right into Paris, and immediately, with very little delay and very little difficulty, he raised armies sufficient to rival those of the greatest in Europe. And it really brought me back to those days of Rome that I so enjoy, where there will be a general so charismatic that, I mean, Augustus is the best example in my the basic lizard brain as far as history goes. Like, Augustus is the best example of someone who just showed up on a battlefield, and then the other side immediately just switched, and we're like, oh, you know what? This guy's actually way cooler than the guy that's in charge of us. We're gonna go fight for him instead. The fact that Napoleon could kind of turn that into almost a science, and command that kind of respect from his enemies, without difficulty. It's seemingly without difficulty from a historical perspective. Is to me puts him as the most charismatic. I think that the fact that he could raise an army from absolutely nothing, like you have the idea of a self-made man in America and in all commercial societies, like you have like a guy who goes out with nothing and then just like amasses a fortune. That's awesome. I love that. I love that idea, and that's kind of implanted something in my brain, I think, of like a model of heroism. And the fact that Napoleon was able to do that, to come from basically an escaped convict, like imagine this guy in prison garb, right, in like an orange jumpsuit, walking into Paris, and everyone saying, "Holy shit, it's you! Like, you're the guy," and him saying, "Yes, it is I. I am the guy." And then people taking up arms to support him, and armies defecting to him, because their loyalty is to a nation second and to a man first. Like, any man that can command that level of loyalty, that level of just power, like charismatic, like his Chastat must have been through the roof for him to walk into a city, a nobody, but not a nobody, a famous prisoner, a famous ne'er-do-well, and walk out a general with an army, able to rival those of the greatest in Europe. That is like, he just new game plus, and he didn't quite win the new game plus, but he really got close. And the fact that he was able to reestablish maybe a fraction, but maybe a substantial fraction of his former glory as a commander is to me the most poignant of human stories involving charisma as the main stat in play, if that makes any sense. And so that's my pitch for Napoleon as the most charismatic.
Okay.
He raised an army from a city that partially loved, partially hated him, but he raised an army from absolutely nothing, and I got to give him respect for that.
Fair enough.
Well, I mean that's yeah, like I said, fair enough. I think that's a fairly well reasoned and well sound thing. But it's one of those things where it's like it's the only point where I would kind of maybe like not butt heads with you, but disagree with you is that I think that that's like his second biggest accomplishment and not his first. You know what I mean?
Explain.
So it's like I feel like his impact on as a general was so much more how he was on the battlefield versus how he was charismatically, if that makes
Without a
sense.
doubt, without a doubt, that's absolutely true. But that is like, as far as historical anecdotes, and for me, what is history but like a series of stories about great characters?
Yeah.
Um, like I think of we're gonna get very controversial in an academic way at the moment.
Okay.
Excuse me. But I think that the idea that history is just a chronicle of forces and of times which drive men rather than men which drive times
Mm-hmm.
is really really it misses the point in my
Yeah.
opinion, because like history is the story of humanity, and if you take humanity out of the story and try to make it a science of trends and forces, I think that you miss the humanity within it, which is everything.
Yeah.
um,
No. I think you're
and
absolutely right.
and so like pushing the academics aside for a minute, like I absolutely agree. Like he probably did, and you know much more about Napoleonic history than I do. I'm really pathetic in my understanding of anything that happened after the fall of Constantinople. Um, so like anything past that is definitely your purview. But
Sure.
as far as historical anecdotes go, which is to me like the elements, the constituents of history, are these like great anecdotes that you want to remember and that you think of as like, this is where France came from. Like George Washington and his exploits, this is where America came from. Like
Right.
this is where we started.
Okay.
As far as history is that, um, that's the anecdote that I come back to again and again when I think of the limits of charisma and really
All
like
right.
what charisma can do. And that's where it puts me for the most charismatic commander as Napoleon.
Fair enough.
So you're definitely right. Like his exploits and perhaps his most important exploits may lie elsewhere. And I have just a bit of a feeling that he's going to remain elsewhere on your list of serious questions.
Tee
Um,
maybe.
by the way you answered that question. But I do think for me, I mean, although I really appreciate that he is a tactical expert and is probably a strategical expert, and by expert I mean a prodigy. Um, but for me, his main, like, the place he occupies in my heart is the place of that guy who raised an army after coming back. That guy who did the encore of all encores in military history. And that's why I place him where I do.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I can respect it, even if it isn't
Definitely.
necessarily where I would place him. What about you, Eric? What is your hot take
Okay. So for
on
this
charisma?
one, I hope, I'm sure you guys have used him for other things. I hope you understand where I'm coming from with this one. But I'm going to have to go with Julius Caesar as most
Mm,
charismatic. At a young age, around, about 19, he was a soldier, sure, but he wasn't a leader at that early age. And one thing I think that really helped him become very charismatic is at that young age as well, he determined that the right move first was to get into politics before truly commanding soldiers. And I think that helped him a long way. He was very charismatic to start. I mean, he was throughout his whole life, but he worked his way up through the Roman administration until he was ruler and or council, and once he kind of had that level of power, he was able to persuade soldiers to agree with him over anyone else in Rome. One of those ways he did that was he knew to. Uh, so what he did was he offered land to soldiers, even though technically he didn't have the right to, and other politicians tried to fight him back with that. So he basically told the soldiers, "Hey, look, I'm trying to give you land so you have somewhere to live," and the other politicians are saying you can't. And he used that and those soldiers to persuade, aka bully the politicians. Now, is it manipulative? Yes, it is, but I think that also has something to do with his charisma because he was able to persuade basically anyone to do what he wanted. Um, and then once he kind of moved forward with actually leading soldiers, he used that charisma to persuade them to do things that they didn't think that they could do. He was always on the front lines. If there was a river, he'd be the first one to cross it just to show them that, first, he's not going to make anyone do anything that he's not himself willing to do, and that he's also showing them that, hey, I can do it, so can you. I have faith in all of you. I think that also helped him with one of his biggest battles, Battle of Elysia. Is it Elysia?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
that's the one.
exactly. They were outnumbered 4-1, roughly, give or take. And I mean, obviously, his soldiers weren't too sure about whether or not they were going to be victorious there. And he goes, "No, I have faith in all of us. I know we can do this." And they beat is it the Gauls?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and because of that, the Gauls then became a Roman region. And I don't know. I just think he was able to persuade people to do things first that they didn't even think were possible for themselves. And because of that, he was able to complete goals that he himself originally, most other people would look at as impossible. But it was just because he was so charming, he was so charismatic, he had faith in himself. His confidence helped him tell other people to have faith in themselves. And I think because of that, he had such a strong like allegiance by his soldiers that I think I don't know. I just think there was so much charisma in that man. I'm gonna end it there, but want to see what your thoughts are.
I mean, so like Rome again is my is the center of my historical
Mhm.
interest and knowledge,
Yep.
and I really couldn't agree more. Like Caesar was that guy
Hmm.
that kind of he was the model.
Yep.
Like he in part modeled himself on Alexander the Great,
Yes,
which
he
was
did.
like his one of his idols, but he became the model for really allegiance of an army or a military to a man rather than a nation.
Yep.
Um, he throughout his life he was extremely in debt until he became emperor, basically, or dictator for life. Like he pulled every string and he made the innovation, just like you said, of being a politician almost first and a commander second, which is uncommon. Like all of his predecessors had really been, they'd been politicians, but they'd really been like military men first and
Right.
foremost. And there was that Roman mold of like a military man who who sees such injustice in the political part of Rome
Right.
and kind of uh, takes power for the sake of stabilizing what is an otherwise degenerate political system. Um, and he did that, and he followed that mold,
Right.
but he did it with a knowledge and a command over politics that none of his like Marius or Sulla,
Right.
his predecessors, ever or the Gracchi ever could have. Um, and for that, I think was his true genius. And indeed, just like Alexander, just like you mentioned at the very beginning, he was a master propagandist.
Right.
Um, I actually have compliments of Garrett for my birthday. I want to say last year, 2 years ago, maybe.
Oh wow, that was a
Um,
while ago.
yeah,
I know what you're
wasn't
gonna
it?
say.
I know
Yeah, I think it was two
exactly.
years ago.
Yeah. Wow. Jeez, time flies, doesn't it? Anyway,
Also, it was
I've
Bob
got
and the two. Don't.
Okay.
yeah, it was Bob and the Two.
Okay.
Was is a land the landmark Julius Caesar, which is just a collection, the complete works of Julius Caesar, um, assiduously annotated, like annotated to a degree where if you read the annotations, it'll take you 4 times as long to read the book. But the complete works thereof, and I have been slowly coming back to them again and again. And what a talented writer! What a
Hmm.
writer for the sake of like you know I told myself I wouldn't bring it to a contemporary place, and I won't. I will keep to that and not bring it to a place of perfect contemporaneity. I think that's the word in politics.
Hmm.
But let's just say like there are individuals throughout history that are extremely talented at speaking directly to the people that are the constituency and that are people that are interested in what they have to say and people that love them. And Julius Caesar was the archetypal genius in that respect. He could really write a compelling story
Of course.
based on loosely, perhaps, on fact, and use that to mobilize people
Right.
politically, to mobilize people militarily. I agree entirely. If he didn't appear otherwise on my list,
Hmm.
um, he would be here.
Okay.
He is absolutely so charismatic. Perhaps the only thing that I would take as a strike against his charisma
Right.
is the fact that he was, for a large part of his tenure as a commander,
Hmm.
he was the commander uh, of an established regimented
Yes.
force, which he had authority to command.
Exactly.
Like he was appointed as a general before he became the the Julius Caesar of legend,
Exactly. Yep.
um, as opposed to maybe somebody who um, seized that power. And Julius Caesar did his fair share of seizing power, but
Right.
absolutely an absolute genius.
Right.
Garrett, do you have anything to say about this?
Not really. I think you really kind of just said everything I would have said. I think my big thing was Caesar as a because he obviously stummy charismatic,
Right.
but I think uh, uh, my my thing with Caesar in this category, I think, is the same thing I would have leveled with Napoleon in the other one. Is that yes, he is charismatic. However, I think he is. I think, as Liam said, I think he was such a better politician and he was
Right.
such a better tactician than he was simply charismatic. As whereas Sherman did not do anything that was particularly tactically brilliant. I mean, yeah, he fainted these things. He was
Fair enough.
above average in tactical competence, but his real claim to fame is charisma. Whereas
True.
with this, I mean, Caesar, you could put him in almost any
Anything.
category on this list,
Exactly.
and you wouldn't be wrong. That's the thing. I don't think you're wrong. I just don't think you're like totally right, if that makes
I
sense.
understand where
Okay,
you're coming from. Sure.
and so that was perhaps Garrett's like his invocation of his choice and his like maybe one sentence criticism
Hmm.
of the other choices. Like Tecumseh Sherman, in this sense, was more charismatic than anything else.
Right.
Um, I'll say as my probably like one sentence rebuttal in that like okay, Napoleon has the benefit over the other two, in my opinion, of having failed and still gained prominence for his charisma. That is absolutely, to a degree, a function of the fact that information was much more difficult to suppress. Our knowledge of the Napoleonic era is just light years past our knowledge of Caesar's time. Um, but if Sherman or if Caesar had failed, do you do you think that they would have attained the same prominence for their charisma that Napoleon did? Because Napoleon did fail, and I think that's a wonder for us as students of history to be able to look at somebody who failed but still garnered so much deification in the eyes of historians. Like, do you think that Sherman and Caesar would have achieved that had they not succeeded in their objectives?
So actually, Liam, that's a really funny that you say that because
Hmm.
there's actually a really famous uh, Sherman quote about him setting off for Atlanta, and that he said, if I succeed, it'll be seen as it'll be an act of genius that God Himself had ordained. But if I am to lose, I will be branded a madman and a butcher. And
Hmm.
I think that his knowledge and his self awareness to say that, I think, answers your question. I think the answer would have to be, as much as I love Sherman, and again, I still think he's still the greatest in this regard, but I think the answer would have to be no.
And then I guess for Caesar, I don't know if I could guarantee that if he had failed, he'd have that same respect. But that being said, he had a charisma. In my opinion, he had a charismatic level comparable to Napoleon. Again, if not, I mean, since I picked him as most charismatic, I'd say he'd be more charismatic. So it's possible that if he were to fail, he would still be heralded. But I truthfully can't say yes or no. I guess so. I guess I'll
That's
do
fair.
what Garrett didn't say at this time. I'll say no. But so I understand where you're coming from.
That's
Yeah.
fair.
Okay.
That's fair. I'm posing you both with the most difficult of historical quandaries, which is the counterfactual. Like,
Yeah.
what could have happened? Like, fuck.
Right. What
God
could have
damn,
happened?
right?
Okay. So now that we've kind of gotten our arguments out, I'm thinking Liam, we should take a pick out of your book, and we should rank the generals 1 through 3, and then the top 2 will be that, like, whoever is the top 2 of the people who we vote for. Then we vote between those 2. That makes sense.
Ah,
Okay.
my friend taking a book from ranked choice voting.
Yes, I am.
Yes, hashtag yes on 2, more voice.
All right, I like that.
That's Massachusetts is voting currently on ranked choice voting.
Oh yeah. Oh cool.
Come November, my fellow Massachusettsian, not you, Garrett, not yet,
I'm coming. Okay, I'm gonna be there
but not in time for the election.
No.
You
You're
won't.
right. I'm literally coming after the election, but after that, then I'm gonna be in Massachusetts. I'm not planning on leaving for a while.
Okay.
We'll get you to Pokemon Go to the polls.
Goodness.
Dude,
You've referenced Pokemon so much today.
Oh my God, you're right. I totally forgot about that. But do you guys remember that from the 2016 election?
Oh, how
Pokemon
could
Go
I
to the polls?
forget? It was like I actually vomited.
What a meme! What a meme! Anyway. Okay, so I love that idea. And let me write them down first, so I'm not influenced by you guys.
Yeah, I am also doing that right now.
Okay, I'm ready.
I'm also ready.
Ready.
Okay, so
Okay.
Liam, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, I'm going number 1 Napoleon, number 2 Caesar, number 3 Sherman.
Okay, so hang on, let me keep track of it. So we've got Napoleon, Caesar. So we've got a third. Did you put Napoleon first?
I did.
Okay,
I chose my own for first. Every pirate only votes for himself.
And second, okay, Eric, you're next.
So I'm going, as much as this pains me, I'm going Caesar, Napoleon, and then Sherman, and it pains me to put Sherman at number 3 on any list. Though I will admit,
Okay.
and I'll talk about this in a later topic, but Sherman's letters to the mayor of Atlanta was amazing. But I'll talk about that later. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you're
Ooh.
talking about. It's great.
I know nothing about that.
Oh, you'll
or
love
anything
that story.
related to my
Yeah,
dynasty.
yeah,
I'm sure I would.
It's fantastic. So I put, just for, not that my vote really counts at this point, but my vote was Sherman first, then I put Napoleon, and then I put Caesar. So now we're choosing. All right, we're getting rid of Sherman. Cry.
I'm upset about that, but
I'm also upset about that. I am very upset about that. But now we have Napoleon and Caesar up for it. So now we have to choose between the 2. So Eric, if you had to choose between Napoleon and Caesar, what would you choose?
Well, obviously I want to win, so I'm going to put Caesar at 1. I do understand where Liam was coming from with Napoleon. He was extremely charismatic. However, and like we said, for both of these people, they are great at so many different things: tacticians, innovative, all of that. I think that there are other ways that Napoleon could win in some of those other things, such as tacticians. So I'm gonna still place my vote at Caesar with 1, but that's up to everyone
Okay.
else.
All right. So that's 1 for Caesar. What about you, Liam?
You know, it's so difficult to draw this line, and like Caesar and Napoleon, you know, two of the great contenders for top spot in my opinion. Like they're absolutely going to show up elsewhere on the list, and I guess that's not really my concern. Like if I have Caesar somewhere else and I vote Caesar, like that's not a problem for me.
Right.
I'm still, you know, as every pirate wants to be pirate chieftain.
Yep.
I'm gonna go Napoleon first, Caesar second.
Yep.
And
So I
it's
guess
a
Garrett, you're the
split
deciding
vote,
vote.
and now it's up to me. Okay, so I think Liam's right. It is a really hard choice.
Right.
Again, like I said, because the thing is, I can't even like rule them out on my criticisms of them because they both have the same criticism. So I would have to go with charismatic voice. I have to go with Napoleon only because Napoleon. Seriously, the ability to be like, I think Liam's right. The
Right.
fact that he was exiled, came back, was able to raise an army
Right.
that was on the size of anything in Europe and do it in like a month. You know, I'm sorry. That's just you can't top that.
Like,
I get it.
could Caesar have done it? Maybe, but
Right.
we'll never know.
Exactly.
That's the
Right,
thing.
maybe, but we'll never know. We can
Yeah.
only there was one of my poli sci professors, great teacher, one of the best teachers I had in college, and he said that in the humanities we don't have a lab, we only have what happened, and
Absolutely.
so this is one of those things where it's like, yeah, he might have, but you
Right.
never know because you
I
can't.
actually like you've just I mean, with quoting that professor, you just really touched upon my thrill for history is
Right.
exactly that. Like I consider economics, which is my, you know, field of discipline, a part of the social sciences, which is oddly, or the humanities rather, which is oddly a controversial statement.
Mhm.
But I agree that for the social sciences in general, history is our only laboratory.
Right.
Mhm.
Like nothing in the social sciences occurs in a vacuum or can be approximated by a vacuum. We have history and we have nothing else really.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so our study of that is maybe the best we have for understanding the actions of humanity. Anyway, I mean, like
Okay.
that's I'm getting a bit in the weeds, but
No, I
I,
got you. No,
yeah.
I think, like I said, I think you're totally right. Rating.
Right.
But let's talk about
Boop.
let's talk about who is the we talked about who's the most overrated general. Who is the most underrated general?
I have an answer for this.
Liam, tell me your
Wow.
answer.
Okay, let's hear it.
Gaius Terentius Varro. Oh wait, no. Oh shit. Oh, hold on. Ask the question again. That guy's garbage.
Okay, I'll set you up. Okay, ready? All right, Liam. Casual question for you: who is the most underrated general in your opinion?
Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus.
Oh, of course.
All right,
Better
Liam. For
known
those of us who
as-
don't know Latin, who is
Better
that
known
person?
by one of his many names as Fabius or Fabius. The Fabian strategy is, in my opinion, one of the great unsung geniuses of history. Or genius, like miracle galaxy brain strats throughout history. The idea that you're facing Hannibal, who will absolutely return to later. Don't you worry. Hannibal is a personal favorite of mine, and was famous for just absolutely destroying pitched battles with tactical brilliance and incredibly motivated soldiers. The Fabian strategy of which was the strategy of the consul Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, was to avoid pitched battles entirely because that was Hannibal's specialty. And since he had to keep his men in fighting condition, he had to pay his men, and he had to supply his men. And he was really dependent on the momentum of won battles and of he was really dependent on his own success to keep himself going and to keep his army going. So Fabius said, we are going to take that from him. We are going to take from him his victories. So Hannibal, as I'm sure we will talk about later once again, he fought Rome for, I believe, 14 to 18 years. 16 is my guess, but somewhere in the realm of what would take a baby to a teenager, to a well-formed teenager. That was the amount of time he was fighting Rome. He really dedicated his life to it, but we'll leave that aside. He was a thorn in Rome's side for teens of years. And he was a boogeyman almost for Romans for teens of years. And he kept armies together for teens of years. But what is most corrosive to an army but having your supply lines cut, your chain of command interrupted by skirmishes, unfair battles in wilderness, envoys and scouts and so on being killed in the dead of night? These are the things that really wear on an army that is fighting for kind of a pie in the sky ideal, taking Rome, a one-day possibility. How do you take hope away from an army? That's by not fighting them. That's by letting them ask their questions. It's really a psychological victory in an almost art of war sense. You let an army start to question why they're fighting at all. Because the vast majority of Hannibal's army was made up of mercenaries, which Hannibal had paid in part very handsomely, but also had promised a great deal after the fall of Rome. And Rome, that great treasure of treasures within the Italian peninsula. If you could sack Rome, you could promise anything to your soldiers. So he really promised a lot to these men. And the longer that they went without a battle, without a success, due to the genius of Fabius, of just he really ran a guerrilla war. He cut supply lines, he killed scouts, he attempted to stymie them at every step without fighting a single battle. That strategy really made them, I think, in my imagination, because you can never really know the opinions of these people, of these mercenaries and Gauls and recruited elements from all across Europe and Africa. You could never really know what they're thinking, but I assume that it made them think, what are we really fighting for? How long has it been since we fought and won a battle? Is Hannibal really this genius that we thought he was? Or is he just a man with an obsession that we're following for no good reason? And I think Fabius actually could have won the war were he not voted out.
Yeah.
Later in his career, and substituted with perhaps less able men. So that's my pick, and it's an awkward pick because Fabius, as a commander, didn't actually win any battles, and he didn't actually make a name for himself in terms of command over individuals. So I might be shooting myself in the foot of my own criticism from before of George Washington and not actually being a great tactical commander. But really having played that four-dimensional chess that Fabius kind of invented in the Western world of letting an army peter itself out, letting perhaps an invading army, which really had no sufficient plan to achieve its true goal, which was to take Rome, letting them languish in the wonder of how they would actually get it done, was to me an act of genius, and to me super underrated. Like, everyone's heard of the Fabian communists, really. The Fabian socialists is anything anyone really knows about Fabius. Maybe somebody with a little bit more historical knowledge will know about Fabius basically. But I think he deserves really a place on top 10 lists, because without fighting a single battle, he defined a type of warfare that was heretofore not really seen in the West. Like I said, the art of war would have prescribed something probably similar. But I think that for that reason, he deserves a place on my list. And I'd love to hear your guys' criticisms and your picks.
Eric, you want to start?
I know I've been long-winded. I'm sorry
Honestly, I
about that.
No, you're
think
good.
I don't think I know enough about the topic to really argue that point. So, Garrett, do you have anything first, and maybe I can kind of listen in what you
Yeah, you
think?
see, piggybacking.
Coattail, yeah.
Honestly, Liam, I am going to disagree with your assessment that Fabius didn't do anything, because he did. So again, a famous quote of Sherman's that I really love and I think really hammers down how I think warfare should be won, and really is won. Not even like I think it should be. It is won. Is by the movement of troops, and this was something that Sherman did all the time. He would oftentimes he would split his army into smaller segments, and he would send, like, it's not a lot of troops, but like a regiment or two, and he would fan out, and he would send him. He would create three groups. One would go to his right, one would go to his left, and then the majority of his army would go to the center. Now, I don't, and because of that, the Confederates had to choose. Okay, do we fight them on all fronts? Do we fight them on one front? What do we do? And because of that, that's how he was able to keep his momentum and keep pushing through through the South as quickly as he did. And so I don't necessarily see the Fabian strategy as a brain dead lull. I'm not just going to fight, because he was moving around. He was trying to put himself in the best position possible to gain to gain the biggest advantage. I don't see that as Washington just being like, "Oh, lull, I'm like going to fight a battle and lose and run away." Because that's pretty much what he did. So I really do. I genuinely don't see that as the same. And so I think Fabius should get more credit than even you're giving him, I think.
Respectable and understood. And I appreciate that you agree with me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, like, again, I don't know if I'm kind of with Eric on this one. So yeah, listeners at home. I mean, my history expertise is rooted entirely in the Enlightenment. I can tell you anything that happened, a couple of hundred years before, and obviously a couple hundred years after. But if you're gonna ask me about antiquity and how the Fabian strategy really realistically played out, or even just about Fabius himself, I draw on a blank, man. I just don't have that knowledge on hand.
Right.
So yeah, Eric, if you got anything, now's the time.
Honestly, I think if anything, we both might have just proved Liam's point that he was underrated.
Yeah. Well,
Because
again,
we
this is a
didn't.
casual question.
Yeah, right.
We don't
Exactly.
need to have
Yeah,
a definitive answer here.
because I think the fact that both of us don't know too much about this topic kind of proves just how underrated he was,
Right.
I guess.
Well,
So
if I'm telling the truth, which
you're right.
to the best of my ability, yes.
Exactly.
But in the accuracy of hindsight, time will tell.
Right.
Awesome. Okay, so Eric, who is your most underrated general?
So mine is definitely not. At least now looking at it, I don't think as underrated. However, I still feel like, I guess, to go off what the whole thing with Napoleon, right? I put him as overrated because there was just so much hype around him. I feel like this one, my answer is still or more well known. However, still, I just feel like there should be more hype around him. And I would say for that, it's is it Flavius Belisarius? Flavius?
Yes.
Yeah, right. I mean, a military commander of the Byzantine Empire. He had some major victories, um, taking reconquesting, I guess, the Mediterranean territory. Originally, the Western Roman Empire. He was kind of called one of the last of the Romans. He conquered the Vandal Kingdom in North Africa. He had some big battles against the Persians, which he defeated. I mean, he was ultimately defeated at Calicium, or no, Calin, Calinikium. I'm gonna mispronounce the
You got
crap
me
out of that
there.
one, but I feel
I felt
like
bad for you.
he was a great leader. I don't have too much specifics. However, he just had a long laundry list almost of victories in his battles, and I just think like with all the hype around a lot of Roman emperors and Roman leaders, he just wasn't really given his due, and I think for that, that's why I chose him as a underrated commander.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know too much about him.
You
This
know
is a
what?
very much in
Actually, I think I
wheelhouse
think
thing.
by the, I mean, I hate to pay you the same compliment as you paid me,
Right.
and perhaps seem biased in that respect,
Hmm.
but I think the very the very fact that I know so little about Belisarius, and I
Hmm.
think it has much to do with the nation that he represented, or like specifically, the Byzantine Empire,
Right.
and kind of how that remains as a well referenced but little researched um, part of public imagination when it comes to history.
Right.
Um, I know just jack squat
Right.
about Byzantine history. And when you said Belisarius, I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh my gosh, I know that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then I quickly Googled him while you were talking,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my god, I actually know nothing.
Exactly, and I think.
And
Oh, go ahead.
no, you're right. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just think it's like what you were saying about what I was saying about what you were saying. As weird as that sounds, but when you think you know something about a person, and you look it up and you realize, oh, I have no idea. I think that kind of just goes to show just how underrated some of these commanders are, and not just to say that these two are the most underrated. It's to say that I feel like there are a lot that are just overlooked, and I think just to find out about them and research them is important.
Absolutely. And
Right.
like, if this question were overlooked,
Hmm.
I think Belisarius would deserves more interest,
Right.
because as far like we at least have a Fabian strategy,
Right.
like we at least know about that. He's become an adjective, which is something,
Hmm.
which counts for a lot.
Right.
But Belisarius, like I've known his name for a long time
Right.
and never known anything about his conquests, which are prodigious.
Right.
My goodness, like the guy was an absolute madman with conquering places that Rome had previously conquered.
Exactly.
Um, which is not to diminish his exploits in any way. Like I, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Really, this is an area where I know too little for reasons of culture, not for reasons of interest, um, and perhaps for reasons of inability. I won't hype myself up too much. Um, I may just like have not studied the Byzantine commanders because I've been too bored with the other elements of Byzantine politics and leadership and history. But
Right.
you're absolutely right. Like what a champion.
Right.
What a guy who conquered so much and could have achieved so much more.
Exactly.
Um, like there was just a possibility he could have restored the Roman Empire.
Potentially.
Yeah, there was just like if he had done things right, he could have been the the greatest commander Rome,
Hmm.
full stop, had ever known.
Exactly.
Um, it just so happens that that's not the way history played out. But
Right.
I think I'm marginally converted really from my previous stance for Fabius. Like
Perfect.
because I had known almost nothing except the name.
Right.
And I think that goes to show that really proves the underrated point. Garrett, give your thoughts and then give your answer to the question.
Oh, like I said, I think you're right. I mean, you know, I'm gonna make you all laugh here, but the only thing I knew that like the only way I knew the name Fabius in the beginning part is because there's a Warhammer character named after him, and I was like, oh yeah, he did some stuff, cool. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of a cool thing to name after him. To be fair, the Fabius in the Warhammer universe is way different than the Fabius you just said. I mean, one is a mad scientist that literally makes like gene abominations, and the other one is a general who conquered, you know, an impressive swath of land.
Right.
But for my underrated general, I chose Vo Nguyen Giap.
You're gonna have to spell that one for me
Whoa.
because I need to definitely look that up.
Okay, so Vo VO,
Hmm.
and then yep,
Nguyen, right?
yep, and
Oh,
then
found
Giap
it.
is
Yep.
yep.
Okay.
So Vo
Yeah.
Nguyen Giap was the North Vietnamese communist general
Yep.
before who fought against the U.S. obviously in the Vietnam War, and the man was prolific at understanding his opponent and understanding how to fight his opponent. He was somehow able to fight a guerrilla war that was using large groups of people. Because the thing that makes guerrilla war really effective is that you have these bands of men or soldiers that fight in really hard, in very difficult terrain, and you fight in like splinter cells.
Hmm.
But he managed to do so in a way where he's effectively commanding an army, but the army is all in different parts of the country and they're connected by tunnels. And he just, and then even when he was asked in this in what's now known as the Tet Offensive, he was asked to really have this fully formal assault. He still was like, wow, we're gonna lose here, but I'm gonna make it to my advantage. And and so the U.S. obviously he attacked a lot of the major military bases in the Tet Offensive, but he concentrated his force and he only took a handful of things that he viewed were really really important. So even though he did lose a lot of soldiers, but that was because his superiors wanted him to really have this big knockout punch. But even though obviously that wasn't going to happen, and he knew it, so he planned around it, and he made the best of the worst situation. And at the end of the war, the surrendering U.S. general turned to Giap and said, "You never beat us on the battlefield. I want you to know that." And he turned to the general and said, "That's true, but it's also irrelevant."
Hmm.
And
You
I
know,
mean, and the thing is, nobody talks about him. Like in all the history courses I've taken, unless you take one on the Vietnam War,
Yep.
no one in military history talks about him. And he is the insurgency general. Like if you're going to follow and fight an insurgency, this is the guy you need to study.
Right.
But nobody talks about him.
so I have to say, like, the Vietnam War really stretches the periphery of my historical knowledge.
Sure.
Um, but from what I have read about Vo Nguyen, yeah, and it's not a lot. But what I have read, he was the guy responsible for the Vietnamese resistance in the Vietnam War as
Yep.
we conceive it as Americans. And a lot is made throughout military history about a lot is written about how home field advantage and local knowledge uh, is like a trump card in the hands of a defending power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think like if you look just one step deeper into historical, because there are different levels of thinking. If you think one level deeper, I think you find that it's not really necessarily the case at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
what you make of it. And there are different commanders who are differently capable of making the most of local knowledge.
Sure.
Um, it played a powerful role in the American Revolution. It played a powerful role in the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
But Vo Nguyen Giap, as far as I know, as far as the commanders that I'm aware of, and I'm not aware of a ton in this era, or even like from the Civil War to this era of the Vietnam War. Um, I don't know much about them, but he seems to me the one who's made the most of local knowledge, the one
Yeah.
who really was able to keep track of decentralized militias in a way that ended up winning the war as a whole, which is difficult as heck. Like you need to choose, like, put yourself in the shoes of a grand commander. Um, Put yourself in the shoes of, like, let's say Ho Chi Minh, and Ho Chi Minh was like really old at the time of the actual Vietnam War, but like put yourself in the shoes of someone who's in charge of the whole military, the commander in chief, and it's like, okay, you're fighting a guerrilla war against an extremely wealthy, extremely well equipped, greatest military in the world, but that has long supply lines. Like, how do you fight that war? And I think that Vo Nguyen Giap, based on my very limited knowledge, did do the best that he could. And he played the best hand that he could have, given his cards. And it ended up being enough, more than enough, in fact, to win that war. And it stymied. Ooh, hello?
Hello?
Hey.
Is everyone there?
Yep.
Yeah, what's up?
Okay, sorry. I heard a loud noise and I was worried. And he stymied the greatest military power in the world at the time. That is probably a feat to which neither Eric's or my choices can really stand up to.
Right.
The fact that, like, our choices were the generals of the great power at the time. They might have not been as great as their former selves, but they were great powers at the time. And they were facing off against formidable adversaries, but they weren't at the time maybe the rebel force. And so, perhaps Vo Nguyen Giap will show up elsewhere on some of our lists, but I really agree with you in the case that, like, he was not only in the sense that he achieved what we need him to for this, which is that he's underrated. He's not very well known, and he succeeded, but he succeeded under adversity that neither of our generals had to face.
And to kind of piggyback on what Liam is saying, I completely agree. When you first said his name, I wasn't even sure who exactly we were talking about. I looked it up. I saw a photo. I recognized the face, but I didn't know too much. So as you were speaking, I kind of read some more up on him. And just like you were saying, the adversity, he was always the underdog, and he found ways to win against better equipped armies time and time again, both in the Vietnam and the first Indochina War. Like, those are just huge victories that he had. And yeah, I have to agree with Liam on that, where it's our underrated ones were more from empires that were, I guess even better equipped, or just, had stronger militaries, but he found a way with what he had, and I think that's huge.
From the annals of the victors.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's. I'm glad y'all agree with me.
Right.
It is a plus. Yeah. So that's just kind of that. All right. So next topic. So this will be another casual. So how about this? Let's do one more casual, and then we'll do one more serious, and then we'll call it for now.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, Garrett's getting his energy back.
Let's do this.
We're getting we're kicking it back. So so now we're gonna jump back into another casual question, and let's tackle personal favorites. So this general may not have been the best general.
Man.
This general may not have been the most tactically brilliant or charismatic or influential, but God damn, did they try? And they were just your favorite. That you just like him for, it doesn't matter the reason. Maybe you thought that he had just like the best suave on the planet. And what do you think? Eric? Why don't you kick this one off? Who's your personal favorite general?
Well, Garrett, I'm going to be honest here. I think you already know the answer, and I'd like you to say the name because I just
Okay.
want someone else to know just how amazing this general was. But if you'd like to
Is
say the name,
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm gonna go off on a limb. Is it William Tecumseh Sherman?
It is William Tecumseh Sherman. It 100% is William. Uh, he, I don't even know where to begin with this general. I remember just as a kid in middle school and high school learning about US history and learning about the Civil War and just hearing the stories. And then, admittingly, I lived in the South for roughly 7-8 years, so I heard
You're the
both
only
sides of the story.
Southerner here at the moment.
Yeah, and I heard both sides of the story. And to have one side say this man was maybe a bit of a madman, sure, but he was such a great leader, and then for another half to be like that man was a monster, a terrible human being. He was just everything about it was amazing. As Garrett was saying earlier, he went through Georgia and basically burned every single thing in his path to the ground, killed anything that walked, burnt anything that stood, broke down any building, just because he wanted to kind of send a message. But at the same time, though to some he might be a madman, this man, I feel, did it with a sense of honor because. As I was actually talking about, Liam, would you like to hear about the letters that Sherman sent?
Hit me with it.
All right. So, few days before Sherman and his men ravaged Atlanta, he sent a
Burned it to the ground,
completely.
right?
Yeah.
Completely. He sent letters to the mayor and said, "Hi, I just want to say I I understand that there are women, I understand that there are children, and I understand that there are men who don't agree with this war that live in Atlanta. And I suggest to you to tell all of them to get on the train and get out of here as fast as possible." He even said, he goes, "Look, I don't want to do this, but I'm gonna do this. This is war and I want to win." And the mayor wrote him a letter back and basically said, "Well, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. So and I don't want to have to, bother my people. So I'm not going to tell them to leave." And basically, Sherman wrote a letter back saying, "I strongly advise you tell them to leave. I understand where you're coming from, but war is war. There are no friends in war. So I recommend that you leave." I think he did that with a sense of honor, and I respect the crap out of that.
Mm.
And then he was a man of his word. He went through and destroyed everything in Atlanta. He destroyed everything. He killed anyone in his path. His men did the same. If there were 10 cows, he'd kill 9 and he'd bring the other one for meat. And it was amazing. It was it the most well planned thing? Probably not. But did he do it to perfection? Yeah, goddamn right he did. That is an American hero, as some might say. And I don't know. He has just always been my favorite. There will be no others. Thank you. I'm done for right now, anyway.
I love that. I love the absolute defense of Sherman as a character. I and I agree. Like that's something that you have to when you're talking about a favorite, you have to take into account like their class
Mhm.
throughout. And I have to agree, like that is class to send messages to the mayor of the city, the ruler or commander of the city that
Right.
you're about to destroy, and say, "Listen, you better tell people that it's gonna get rough
Right.
because of me. I'm gonna get there and it's gonna get rough.
Exactly.
You better tell them to skip town before I get to them because it's gonna get rough." Like
So
that's pretty badass.
Right.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, well, Eric, to kind
Hmm.
of give a little bit more context
Yep.
on so Sherman has been made semi-rightfully so, into kind of the Attila the Hun of the North
Yes.
for the South.
He has indeed.
The thing is, though, is that contrary to popular belief, Sherman actually didn't burn down at literally everything in his
Well,
path.
okay, but I mean,
But and to my knowledge, he did not go out of his way and kill civilians. That to
I don't think he killed any civilians actually.
I can't think of an account in which he did. He did burn down property
right?
because
Yes, he did.
He definitely
his
destroyed property.
his
He
whole
definitely
shtick.
freed slaves.
Right. I mean, well, he did. I mean, again, Sherman's a weird one that
Yep.
way. He's very much the contradiction in similar to, not so much as Jefferson, but in the same vein. He's somebody who, he was actually in charge of LSU for a while,
Right.
which is Louisiana
Sorry.
State
Okay,
University.
then can I
Really?
state, when I say he killed, let me rephrase it then. When he killed anyone in his path, it was more just the soldiers who stood up against him.
Yeah.
I apologize for that. Sorry.
Right. No.
Mm.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
that.
No.
I think that
Okay.
he did not kill civilians.
No.
But
No. He wasn't like
yeah.
Attila the Hun or Timur or any of those people. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that that's my to kind of get back to my point though, is
Yep.
that he's somebody who actually was he was president of LSU. He was somebody who really was frankly a Southern sympathizer. He
Yes.
really
I'm
didn't.
sorry.
He didn't
I have to ask,
Mhm.
like, just from a personal curiosity standpoint, was that before the war? After
before
the
the
war?
war.
hmm
Interesting. That's so fascinating.
Right.
He was somebody who was Ohio born. He went down to the South. He had some military experience, and he went down south, and he just kind of did his thing.
Well, where does military experience come from?
To my knowledge, it was. I don't think he went to West Point,
Mm,
but he may have gone to West Point. You know what? Hang on.
yeah,
I
I'm
don't.
looking it up now.
I'm looking up now. Eric, did he go to West Point? Because I don't think he
I
did.
want to say he didn't, but I don't also want to say it with
Well, like, did he
certainty.
have any, like, official, like, did he serve in any specific wars? Is my question, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So he
Was he
did.
in the war of
He did go to
1812?
West
Probably
Point.
not.
He did.
Um,
Oh my goodness, I sound like such an idiot right now.
Ohio, 11 kids, Sherman John.
Yeah, he was too young to serve in the 1812. Mexican American.
No, but he
Spanish
probably served in the
American?
Spanish and Mexican
Okay.
Spanish and Mexican War. Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Okay, so that's where he got his chops.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's where all the Civil War generals got their chops. Was the Spanish
Yeah.
American was the Mexican American War. So Sherman, then and so the thing is that because he was really a Southern sympathizer in a lot of cases, he didn't have a problem with slavery, but
True.
he did have a problem with secession. So he's like, no, you don't understand. You don't get to choose which rules you follow and which ones you don't. If the government in the United States and the states as a whole agree that slavery is bad, then we need to stand by that.
Exactly.
And
Right.
and that's why he had such a problem with the Southerners. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, again, and look, he was personally a pretty racist person. I could go into I could go in depth, but I think that'd be kind of going like me delineating a little bit too much.
Right.
But I mean, but even though he was racist, he would go up to African Americans and he would shake their hand,
Right.
and he would say, and he would
Wow.
treat them in ways that really nobody else would at the time. He's a really interesting character.
Definitely.
Shaking the hands of a black person in America was like, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
Yes.
right, because the thing is that they had the stigma of being unclean.
Well, up until the 1950s and 60s, that's a big deal.
Yeah, but I mean that's what he would do. He would ride up next to him, and the slaves began to march with the army, because as they saw it, and rightfully so, that if they march with Sherman, that's their ticket out of there.
I mean, okay, so
Sadly,
correct me if I'm wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong here. His promisers were the foundation or the reason for the Freedmen's Bureau, wasn't he? He was the one who promised 40 acres and a mule, no?
Yes, he was. He thought that was entirely reasonable. The Freedmen's Bureau was not established to make good on that promise, though.
But he was the one that made that original promise.
Yes,
right?
he was the man who made that original promise. Yes,
that's
he thought that was
incredible enough.
Well, that's because he literally sat down with a lot of the slaves that were there. Because so the thing is that the way that the slaves Sherman used the slaves as effectively like labor gangs. He used them to cut
Mm,
down trees to make roads through swamps and things like that for
mm,
his cannons and
Yeah.
whatnot. And the one thing that he asked them, he said, "Okay, well, what can I do for you to help?" And they said, "Give
right.
us 40 acres and a mule." And he
Mm,
goes, because we will not be free until we have effectively financial independence. And Sherman's like, yeah, that makes sense to
mm,
me. Sounds good. That's pretty much what he promised. Now, he did not have, for all his genius, he was not politically very good. He was a pretty shit politician, to the point where he compared the people in Washington to vipers, and he said that good men don't behave this way. To which Grant had to come down and say, "You need to behave."
Also, I just want to
So,
clarify as well. Sherman proposed the 40 acres. He did not include the mule.
oh
That
really? I
came
didn't
later.
know.
Yeah, that came later.
But notwithstanding, that's
Yep.
that Sherman burned down more. He attacked the South's ability to make war as
Yep.
opposed to the personnel to in the civilians of the South.
Exactly.
So,
Yep.
like one
mm,
of the most famous things he did was he would take the railroads that connected the South, and he would rip them apart, heat them up, and then
Hmm.
bend them around trees,
Yep.
and those were called Sherman's neckties.
oh my
And
god.
so, and that's the thing, because his thinking was, he's like, dude, they can make as much gunpowder as they want. If they can't ship it anywhere, who cares?
Mm,
Exactly.
mm. And that
So,
is to some extent like a strategic intelligence.
yeah, no,
That
I'm telling you, he was a great general. So yeah, that was just my little
mm,
info dump on Sherman, because
mm.
I'm with you, Eric. I think
Appreciate it. Right.
he's one of the greats.
Oh yeah.
Well, so I'm sorry. So this is Eric's pick
This is my
Yes, this is
pick.
Eric's pick. I know I
I
for
kind
was
of
gonna say
hijacked it at the end
basically
there.
Garrett's pick as well, from what it sounds like. But yeah, that was my
Well,
pick.
no, it's actually not. It's not my
I
pick.
know.
It's not my
I
pick.
know.
But I just know a disgusting amount on Sherman, and Liam sounded like he was interested, so I kind
Right.
of went into it.
Of course.
so I think we're missing Garrett's pick now.
Well, Liam, you haven't gone yet,
Yeah,
have you?
you haven't either.
You go first, Garrett.
Okay.
Oh, okay, all right. Um, so my pick for favorite general is Nathaniel Greene. He is
Mm.
somebody who is he's Washington's number 2 man in the war. And he was a guy who is the most unlikely soldier humanly imaginable. He was raised as a Quaker in Pennsylvania, so obviously that means nonviolence, and he is like, and he was very religious, but he viewed that what the British were doing was an atrocity. So he says effectively it would be ungodly to not stand up to them and to fight. So he decided to fight, and so he was a very talented subordinate. May not have had a lot of military experience, but he had a very keen tactical mind. He really understood how this war was to be fought and what he had to do to win it. But he did fail. He failed actually spectacularly. So there was in the Army's retreat from New York, he was left defending Fort Washington, which is across the Hudson Bay, and around Long Island, and on the other side of Long Island, or not on the western side, so west of Long Island. That's where Fort Washington is, and and Washington was like, I don't know. I think we should just abandon the fort. It's not worth holding. Greene turns to him and says, no, man, I can hold it. And then he gets absolutely clocked. I mean, he gets his clock cleaned. He loses a full third of the army because of that. And yeah, that's a big problem. So what Washington's like, okay, look, you made a mistake. We gotta fix it. And so Greene, humiliated, goes like, all right, effectively, I gotta get back in Washington's good graces. And he does that by becoming the quartermaster. Now, if you know anything about being a quartermaster, it's a very important job, but it's not a job that has a lot of glory per se. So he's in charge of making sure the army gets supplies. And if you're a rebel army that doesn't have a lot of money. Again, like Liam said earlier, the Americans had the greenback or the dollar at the time, and that was worth squat. People literally use it as toilet paper as opposed to money because that's how worthless it was. And so Green went through and he had the brilliant idea of going to farmers and people like that, and he wrote them an IOU, which is really all he could for the food at the time. The Congress eventually did honor these IOUs, but that was, not until, 10, 20 years after the war when we actually had money. So, but Green does succeed in rebuilding the supply lines and and makes the army effectively able to stay in the field. Washington is impressed by this and gives him a command of the Southern forces. So now he fights the war in the South. He leads General Cornwallis up and down the South because he realizes that if he fights the British in a pitched battle, he's going to lose. So he fights this kind of like long retreat, and he is exhausting the British forces, bringing them, more into the Carolina backcountry, which is nothing like it is now. I mean, there's some swamps in South and North Carolina now, but before it was everywhere, and the British had no idea how to handle it. But Nathaniel Green soldiers were troopers, and they would move upwards of 8 to 10 miles a day, which on foot is dummy fast. And so they always stayed one step ahead of the British, and he eventually was able to link up with Washington as he pushed down to Yorktown. So Nathaniel Green, just as a guy, I'm just like he you want to pick his brain because he's a Quaker, but also decided to fight. And then also, I feel like he would have a big ups and downs kind of thing because he had a very rocky war. But it was a very interesting and he's just he's a character that I think would never give a straightforward answer because there would always be something more complicated on top of it. So I just think he's cool that
way. I love the idea of a quartermaster general. I think they do the work that is, in general, as far as we're talking about underrated, which is I guess the last question.
Yep.
That is like the most underrated but most important job of any military force, because that is the lifeblood.
Yeah.
Like a quartermaster and the equivalent, ranks throughout history. That is the person who decides, or the person who figures out how the army and the military gets funded. And I think it was Napoleon, actually, a Napoleonic quote, like, armies march on their stomachs, I think is the quote of his.
Right.
It's like, you've got to feed an army of an insane number of individuals. Yep. That's the real trouble of raising and maintaining an army. It's like an absurd number of individuals you have in a very concentrated area. And unlike a city where you can rely on commerce to bridge the gaps between extremely concentrated individuals and wealth and supplies, you have to do it all by command.
Right.
And an economic point of view, it's extremely difficult to, through command, get exactly what is needed, or a little bit more than is what is needed, to individuals who need it in order to do their work. Like, that is as underrated as a role as I can imagine.
Right.
And so Nathaniel Green, as far as people I've wanted to read for a long time, like, I don't know if he's had any publications.
Not to my knowledge.
Any, I'm sure he's had biographies of him. And those have been on my list for quite some time now, for like a couple months now.
Right.
Specifically Nathaniel Green, because in terms of sorry, this is personal favorite, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, this is my personal favorite. Yeah.
Nathaniel Green, like, that's somebody who I've been wanting to look at for a long time.
Right.
As far as favorite, I don't know if I could really vote on him as favorite. I mean, he's of course not my favorite because I've not put in as much effort as I need to really understand his contributions.
Right.
But as far as the quartermaster general and that role in the Continental Army, I think that's That's of paramount importance, and it's something that I would put. I mean, again, drawing back to my Washington criticism,
Hmm.
I don't know if I can consider that a commander level, like a commander style, I guess, compliment that I can pay Mr. Green, or
Yep.
I guess, what was he, like Major General Green,
Yep.
um, or Quartermaster Green. But I think that role in general is very well unsung, and he was even a contender for me for most underrated. I
Oh,
just didn't
really?
know
Oh,
enough
wow.
about him to really expound upon that and make a case.
Huh. That's interesting.
Right. Also, I mean, this Green was such an unlikely hero, general, whatever you want to call him, commander. He was so unlikely because, as you were saying, he is from a Quaker family. Um, Before the war, he was a blacksmith for his father, and this guy had asthma and walked with a very pronounced limp. He did
Right. I
not.
did. I didn't know either of those
Yeah,
things.
this guy was just such an unlikely person to be in the position he was put in, and he did very well at it. So
Yeah.
now, again, like Liam was saying, personal favorite to me, no, but that's because I don't know. Again, Sherman for me, but I mean, I
Well, we've all had different upbringings, right?
exactly,
And we've
and
all
this,
had different
Yeah.
like
and also
influence.
maybe not my personal favorite, but a very interesting person to talk about,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
and like Liam was saying,
absolutely.
I now I kind of want to read even more about him and kind of learn more
Yeah.
about what he went through during the war, because that's a very interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, it's
Absolutely.
it's just a fun.
Nathaniel
Yeah.
Green, yeah, absolutely. One of, if I'm to create a pantheon of of underrated individuals throughout the history of warfare,
Hmm.
Nathaniel Green is absolutely, without a doubt, in that top 10 list.
Right.
I maybe wouldn't go that far, but I do think he is. I mean, he is very important, and he's
Right.
somebody who is pretty underrated. But I do. I just think the thing is that like that's the thing. I don't know where I would put him. I see Green as like an above average commander
Hmm.
and above average historical character.
Sure.
But I would not be surprised if I didn't see him in the top 10 list. It's one of those things.
Okay.
All
So yeah,
right,
Liam, I think you're
Yeah,
next,
you're
I'm
up.
going to
right?
finish this question off. So I'm going to quote at length from Theodore Roosevelt Dodge,
Okay.
um, a Civil War uh, a Civil War era historian and a veteran of the Civil War.
Okay.
And this is all in the public domain, so you don't have to worry too much about repeating this.
Okay.
Hannibal, as a young general, showed the same bodily strength, enthusiasm, and gallantry as Alexander. Later in life, while never lacking boldness of conception and execution, he was not reckless. His moral bearing was higher, his passions well under control. Each had abundant willpower, each had remarkable intellectual qualities. Hannibal was probably a man of greater culture. Alexander, as king, commanded the fealty of his army as well as won the love of his leader. As leader, Hannibal had but his character to rely on, but he held the affection and duty of his men as no general in history has done. Both were keen and long-headed in diplomacy. Alexander always had success to aid him. Hannibal did his greatest diplomatic work under difficulties. The king was a prime favorite of fortune. She smiled on Hannibal until after Cannae. Thereafter no man ever faced luck so contrary. Each conducted war with method and a wise weighing of resources and work to be done. Hannibal was crafty, Alexander open and bold in conducting a campaign, but both kept with equal clearness their object in view. Each was a master of logistics. Each was careful in rationing, arming, and equipping his army. As tacticians, it is hard to choose between them. Arabella and Cannae stand on the same level. Each inherited an army. Each used it with extraordinary ability and kept it in the best condition. Alexander got larger results from his victories, but this was owing to the conditions under which he wrought. Hannibal could not make his battles decisive. The Roman Republic was like a cyclopean wall. In pursuit and in sieges, the Macedonian was the bolder and greater. Gauged by the work he had to do, the resistance he encountered, and the means he commanded, Hannibal outranks any general of history. So that's me closing
It's
the
quite
book.
the mouthful.
So I have a quick question, Liam.
Ask the question.
So is your answer Hannibal?
My answer is
No, I'm kidding.
Couldn't tell.
No, that was good.
That's all a quote, because I could not have possibly said it any better, by
Fair enough.
Theodore Roosevelt Dodge. Again, a military historian, a veteran of the Civil War, and someone who actually, to stand his book for just a moment, someone who actually went to Spain and traveled through the Alps to try and determine what Hannibal's path was through the Alps. That to me is a level of historian, I guess, a level of adventurism of an historian that I've never before imagined.
That's awesome.
As a possibility. But leaving aside Theodore Roosevelt Dodge, leaving aside his exploits, Hannibal in general, to me, is a personal favorite. And this is, again, something I hope we never vote on, because it's just so personal.
Oh, no, well, this is a casual one. So
yeah.
It's just so personal. Hannibal was, to me, he was the genius of Alexander. He was the charisma of a Napoleon or a Caesar. He was the diplomatic personality of anyone else we might see on this list, on these many lists. But he did it all without really commanding a force with any real legitimacy. He paid his way through Gaul and through the Alps. Any Gallic tribe he encountered, he fought them, and then he paid them off, perhaps. But he also gave them promises.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Rome, like, you know that Rome is our greatest enemy. Together, you and I, we fight against Rome. He kept his army together for, again, what I believe to be, I think it's between 14 and 18 years. I think 16 is where I'll draw it in the middle there. I think it's 16 years he kept his men in the field. And that's not the men of a legion. Those aren't men that were conscripted and that were paid regularly. These are men that were drawn from all parts of I guess the classical world as mercenaries, and were very often went without pay for years, perhaps for decades, when without pay. At a certain point, there's a turning point in which the Second Punic War becomes a personal quarrel between Hannibal and Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at or after that turning point, every moment that Hannibal's army stayed together as a unified force is a miracle of charisma, of command, of power, of personal power. The fact that Hannibal could keep an army together for perhaps a decade longer than it intended to work for the destruction of Rome speaks to him personally as an individual. He was a tactical genius. He was a charismatic leviathan. He was a badass in every respect. He gouged out his own eyes in the swamp. His own eye, sorry, singular, in the swamp. And for the sake of this unending vendetta against the Romans. And he never quite enjoyed the satisfaction of achieving his goal. He never achieved his goal. Rome never fell under his command. And yet he commands this place in history as one of the primary and perhaps the greatest and the most laudable enemy of Rome, written from, of course, a Roman perspective.
Right.
Sure.
Because those are the records that survive to this day. We have, as far as I'm aware, no Punic records of Hannibal's tenure as commander
Probably not,
of the
seeing as how
army.
the Romans probably burnt it down.
I'm sure, yeah.
Exactly. So we have him and him alone as the commander of this vast force of essentially recruits, whether they were from tribes of here or there, Numidia or of Gaul. He was in command, and he told these people, "We will take Rome," and they believed him for enough time from a baby to become, at that time, an adult.
Right.
From a whole generation, he led this crusade against Rome. He was never successful. He was lampooned in Roman press. He was a boogeyman. He was hated. But at the same time, he was respected. And he is respected to this day as a man who took this is stretching my knowledge of tactics, but I believe that he took what was Hanno or Hamilcar. I think his father's
That's
tactic.
his dad.
His father's tactic, which was a naval tactic of encirclement, which Hamilcar intended to use against the Romans, but eventually failed. He took that tactic and he brought it onto the battlefield as an infantry commander, and he used it to great effect, just destroying army after army after army. And truly, as far as we can consider tactical geniuses, Rome had a generation of consuls to deal with this threat. And only after appointing somebody who could take the battle to Carthage at Zama, and who could play politics before he played military strategy to bring the battle to somewhere Hannibal wasn't comfortable to fight. Only somebody like that could have finally defeated him. In my mind, that puts him at the top of my pantheon, personally. Just like, if you couldn't beat somebody on the field as far as fair fights exist in reality, in a fair fight, that you had to bring it to his home, that you had to play politics to win that battle, shows to me that not only of one generation, but of two generations, because he fought for an entire generation against Rome, that you could have, for two generations, not found a man to sufficiently oppose him, except perhaps Fabius, who didn't actually fight any battles, so he can't really be considered a military commander in the sense of a tactician or a strategist. No man could defeat him in the field, and for me, that makes him a favorite. And in general, just in terms of personal, like, just what personally impresses him upon me, like the fact that he crossed the Alps and was willing to sacrifice nigh 50% of his fighting power, confident that he could make it up with his personal charisma. The fact that he fought a war without the really explicit support of his council at Carthage, the fact that he fought this battle essentially as a lone agent against Rome, is to me just the greatest of human accomplishments. A place that really earns you a place at the table, not only of those who could have, but those who did achieve at the very highest level of historical achievement. And that's my very long-winded case for Hannibal as the greatest military commander, personally, as I see it, of all time.
Well, you got me there, bud. I mean, I don't really have anything more to add. I can't really add or take it apart any more than that.
So
I mean, the tragedy you can kind of put toward him is that he didn't win.
Yes, he did not win.
that being said, Liam, I'm just gonna let you know this now. You stole a lot of what I'll be saying later on when we discuss other topics.
Oh
But I
no!
appreciate it. But actually, kind of to add to what you said, and this isn't gonna fully take over what I had planned to speak about. But when you said when the Second Punic War seemed to be, a personal thing, it truly was, because the First Punic War, the leading commander of the Carthaginians was his father Hamilcar, and
Right.
once he lost, that brought a lot of shame to his family, and
Yes.
Hamilcar taught Hannibal at about the age of 9 after the First Punic War. He goes, "Your whole goal in life is to take down the Romans," and he forced that into his son. And truly, that's what it was. The Second Punic War was basically just a personal war from Hannibal saying, "I will take down the Romans." Now, did he know? We know the end to this story, but also another thing I'd like going back, if we could, I'd like to add another person I'd like to have a beer with, and that's Scipio, just to see what his thoughts on Hannibal were.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And actually, so I mean, first of all, I'd like to bring up as the first point. I guess there are two things here.
Yeah.
One, like, imagine if the die was cast in the other direction, and Hannibal had been born a Roman, and he was a Roman general.
Right.
Imagine what he could have achieved for Rome.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine on, like, the winning side of history, perhaps. And I think that's a big part of Hannibal's appeal, is the fact that he is the underdog. But and that's valid. But, like, he could have done anything, I think, for the Roman Republic at the time.
Definitely.
And as far as sorry, what was your second point?
Just I would like to add someone I'd like to have a beer with, and that was Scipio, because I feel like Scipio would have great tales about Hannibal. Even if he was his adversary, I think he would be able to kind of talk, because as you had spoken about the fact that there's not too much in writing about Hannibal. I feel like Scipio would be able to give a really good portrayal of just how amazing he truly was, whether he liked him or not.
Yes, and okay, that's what I wanted to bring up, is that there is a potentially apocryphal account from the court of a Greek king. I think the king of Cyprus, but I might be putting too fine and inaccurate a point on it. So after Hannibal had lost the Battle of Zama, he was, excuse me, never captured. He was never subjugated. I think he fled the field of battle, and he, I believe, toward the courts of Greek kings for a time. There's a potentially apocryphal account of him actually meeting Scipio Africanus at the court of a Greek king. Actually, I think it was the king of Syracuse, not Cyprus. But again, I could be wrong. And there's just like an excellent, really poetic account of the two of them meeting and discussing military engagements. And it's that poetic account that leads me to believe that it's probably apocryphal.
Sure.
But what an excellent thing to read about. I definitely implore upon the both of you to seek that out after we're done here. It's just like, read up or listen to, I believe there's probably podcast done on it. on Scipio Africanus and Hannibal after Zama, meeting one another and discussing just military history and discussing who the best generals of all time they think they are,
Right.
and they think are. It's something that you, as a student of history, maybe want to happen. It's something you want to read and be like, yes, there's closure here.
Right.
There's these people who had every reason to hate each other, but were perhaps equal or approximate in ability. It's them hashing it out on their expertise. But as far as it actually was historically, I'll leave that to the historians.
Right.
But anyway, that's my pick. That's my favorite. He's a personal favorite for a number of reasons. There's a rebellious streak in me that I think loves Hannibal, just for being an enemy of Rome,
Right.
but also for being such a genius and someone revered even in Rome. Perhaps after the reign of emperors who were born in Hispania, where Hannibal was raised, but like Trajan actually was raised in Hispania, if I'm not mistaken. I believe Marcus Aurelius too.
Yeah.
Were raised in the hunt in the I guess what do you call the stomping grounds of Hannibal himself, and consider themselves Punic descended,
Right.
if I'm not wrong.
I honestly don't know.
So I'm happy to stretch the edges of your expertise, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, stretching is a liberal word. I would go non-existent.
Well, anyway, that's what puts him at my favorite, and I'm fully aware that I've taken up an absurd amount of time making this case.
You're chilling. It
Unconscionable.
was honestly, it was only 25 minutes.
Also, that being said, Liam, at some point down the road, you and I need to have a discussion about Hannibal because I love Hannibal.
Well, I'd like to read more of this very long tome about Hannibal.
Right.
I've read probably a quarter of it altogether, and it's oh my god, there's so much to learn. There's so much to know about especially. I think that to maybe weaken my case just a tiniest smidge, like there's an inherent appreciation we have above and beyond the appreciation we have for those a part of the winning side.
Right.
Like there's an underdog bias that I think is pretty, or you can call it anti-survivorship bias maybe. Like we want that guy to win. We want the underdogs to win. We're like, oh shit, like this guy's against the greatest forces of his time. Like, you give him a little credit above and beyond what you might have otherwise.
Right.
And that's definitely in play with Hannibal. But and I welcome those kinds of criticisms. But absolutely, I'd love to talk to you more about this. And I'd love to do just to put it on the record and to maybe put Garrett, someone who's maybe the least interested, on notice about this. I'd love to do a talk just about the Punic Wars, just about Hannibal, just about Scipio, just about Fabius, just about that whole era in Roman history.
I will have to do my research, but here's the thing, Liam. I won't say no.
And
I won't say no, but I would have Eric would have to come back and balance it out because I'm telling you right now, I don't know enough to do a whole episode on it, but I would be up for it.
So anyway, that's my just unconscionably long-winded case for Hannibal Barca, Hannibal the Great.
Excellent. Right. Okay, well, now that we've gotten here, I think it's time for us, because this is going to be the last question. And I think this is going to be a serious one now, so we will vote.
Okay.
But I think it's one that I think we should end on an emotional high note, or if nothing else, a very animated note. Let's talk about who we think is the worst general of all time.
Oh, okay. Ooh, this will be fun.
All right, Eric. All right, I know you've already got one locked and loaded. I can tell. Hit me with it.
All right, that's going to be none other than George McClellan.
No way, dude!
Yes, you picked
I
him
have the
too?
same
Yes.
one.
Okay.
Oh
Dude,
no!
Oh, you're
sorry. I'm
kidding,
sorry, man. I'm sorry. George McClellan is the worst, though.
dude. He is okay. You go, and then I'll go, and then it'll be great. Go.
Okay, so I'll do the brass tacks. You get to the nitty gritty. But to start,
Sounds like a plan.
let's start with the fact that President Lincoln said that George McClellan suffered from a case of the slows. That's not a good thing to start off with. This dude had so much potential. He was second in his class at West Point. Like, everyone thought this was going to be some great leader. And I mean, admittingly, it seemed like he should have been. He was always well prepared, always well stocked. His troops had high morale. He never was short on supply of anything, except for the fact that he had no aggression whatsoever. And as a military leader, you need at least some of that. And he, again, had none. He would often refuse to fight. And one of his biggest issues is he would always overestimate the size of his opponent's army. And because of that, he was passive. uh, he was on his way to the Confederate capital in Richmond. He had a much more superior force than who he was about to battle. In fact, he outnumbered them 10-1. And as he began to push forward, this battle took about a month, and there is absolutely no reason for that. They were so much more superior. They could hear the church bells of Richmond, as some call it. And he just, for some reason, refused to push forward. This even led to Robert E. Lee coming in and replacing Commander General Joseph E. Johnston. And Lee knew about McClellan. He knew that he had a case of the slows, as some would say, and was very passive. And all he did was push back. And because of this, McClellan retreated and did nothing. Abraham Lincoln, in fact, relieved him of his position at this point, but then he was later reinstated. Um, at a later time due to a loss, but he then had another chance to end the war at the Battle of Antietam, and again he kind of, just had a case of the slows, wasn't really willing to push towards victory, and especially with Antietam, he had a chance to kind of end the war right then and there, and he's just there's so much wrong with him. But before I let Garrett go any further, I also want to add a fun fact about him. He also ran for president as a Democrat
Yeah.
against Lincoln in 1864. My favorite part, though, is his platform was not fighting, which, I mean, that suits him very well. And by the way, if anyone noticed, he did not win that election. But okay, that's my piece.
Yeah, George B. McClellan. What
We're
a
definitely in the both of your fields of expertise here.
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
totally dead in the water with McClellan. The best that I know is that there's a street named after him in the town of Amherst, Massachusetts. Beyond that, I am absolutely dead in the water. So Garrett, I'll let you take it away.
All right, okay. George B. McClellan. This man is Eric. I think you summed it up brilliantly when you said he had every advantage,
Mhm.
and he biffed it not once but twice. I mean, here's the thing. So he is now. We have to give credit where credit is due. George B. McClellan was the first general that looked at the Civil War and said, "This is going to be serious." I mean, to be
Mhm.
fair, Sherman had been saying that before, but he had been written off as a madman.
Exactly.
He said this war is going to be it's going to end by Christmas, and it was going to be one battle, and that's going to be it. McClellan and Sherman looked at the situation and said, "This is going to be a long war," and so McClellan then decided to drill this army, make it into something professional, make it into something that could actually do something. He was a very good parade ground general. He was a very good drill sergeant. And then he shows up for the Peninsula Campaign. He lands with some resistance, and this is something I told Liam before, and I think it's hilarious, is that he then gets outwitted almost in every single possible capacity. So this is my favorite. So he's pushing up the peninsula, okay? He's pushing up through Williamsburg and all that stuff, and he hits a point where there's a small Confederate fort. Now, the Confederate general looks out the fort and he goes, "Oh my God, look at all these Union soldiers. We're screwed." But he goes, "Okay, I'm going to fool them." So what he does is that he parades his soldiers out in front, but he has them walk in and around the side of the fort. So it looks like there are more soldiers coming into the fort than there actually are, because McClellan can't see around. So he's like, oh, dude, I need so much. So he writes Lincoln. He goes, hey, Lincoln, I need more soldiers. And Lincoln's like, what are you talking about? You've got like 100,000 soldiers, and the Confederates at most have like 25,000. You should be fine. And he goes, no, 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 no. I need more. So then Lincoln goes, fine. So he gives him another 20,000 soldiers. He then attempts to take the fort, but then fails because he doesn't commit enough of his forces. So because he doesn't commit enough of his forces, he's like, they're unbeatable, and he pulls back to the beach. And this just sums up McClellan in a nutshell. He takes a little bit of a setback, and he doesn't, and he just crumbles. He cannot. It gets to the point where when one of his soldiers says McClellan is either a coward or a traitor, one of the two.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's perfect. It's actually perfect. So yeah, I mean, without like really going into it, like that's McClellan in a nutshell. And then hilariously, he tries to trash talk Grant to Lee, because Grant at the time is the only one winning any battles, and so not to Lee, to Lincoln.
Yep.
And Lincoln said, because the thing is, Grant was unfairly labeled a drunk. He just would drink because he missed his wife, and so Lincoln, upon hearing that Grant was drinking, he said, "I want a barrel of whatever that man is drinking and sent it to all my generals." And then McClellan's like, "Oh, but that's not." He goes, "I don't care. He was winning. We are not winning right now. We should be winning."
Yep.
It's great. Yeah. So that's McClellan in a nutshell. And yes, he did run on a campaign to end the war in 1964. And then Sherman did his march, and then the Union were like, "Oh, well, we're gonna win. There's no reason to quit," and it was great.
Yep.
So yeah, that's McClellan. But Eric, I'm glad that you and I both had the same pick.
Yeah,
that's really
that was
fun.
hilarious.
I'm thrilled that you guys have a pick that I'm just like totally unaware about, because it gives me an opportunity to learn.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
My choice is, of course, indicative of my bias towards.
Sure, of course. Well,
I mean, ours is ours.
I mean, ours is literally like as American history as it can get.
Yep.
And I'm excited about that, because I have to say I'd be less excited about somebody whose frame of reference was closer to mine, because I love that you two can dovetail off one another and really talk about things and expound upon things that I'm not personally super aware of.
Right.
Like, again, I've heard of McClellan not as a commander, but as a namer of roads. You know?
Right.
Right.
Me, I've got somebody, again, indicative of my bias.
Of course.
Publius Quinticlius Varus.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody knows this guy, perhaps, as the loser of the Battle of Cannae.
Yep.
Cannae, if you prefer. The guy, I mean, need we say any more, was a pleb. He was a pleb elected to office as consul. Big mistake. First of all. Secondly, okay, let's talk tactics, because that's all I really know about this guy. Except
Sure.
He was a pleb, which should tell you all you need to know already. But ignoring that. So Varus, he's a pleb. He says, we're going to fight Hannibal head on. This was after the tenure, of course, of Fabius. He says, listen, we're going to fight him head on. We're going to crush him. And the Senate says, yeah, that sounds good, because they're idiots.
Yeah.
So, what is Hannibal known for? Let me ask a question to the audience here. That's you and that's Eric. Eric and Garrett. What is Hannibal known for in terms of tactics?
I would say unconventional, but encirclement mostly.
Eric?
So now, in regards to that battle in particular, or just in general?
In general, what is Hannibal known for? Up until that battle, in fact. Like, what was Hannibal known for?
More of just like kind of going straight forward, wouldn't you say?
I would say
he was
yes.
more for casual deception.
Right. Like that's true. Yeah.
Deception, tactics, and as Garrett said, encirclement.
Yes.
You couldn't
yes,
have a conversation
that's fair, yes.
about Hannibal
Yeah.
without using the term encirclement
Well,
or the
right.
Roman equivalent.
I was going to say that about with the battle of Cannae you were talking about, where the
So,
encirclement, but
what
yep.
did Varro do? Or Varus do? Varus,
Dillweed is what he did.
Mhm.
he said, I think I will concentrate my troops very thickly as a short but thick line. A chode of a line, if you will. He created a chode of a line, a very thick but short line. And what did Hannibal do?
He's
He
just like,
He
I'm gonna
encircled
bend
encircled them.
around the
Yeah.
chode.
He
I
took
will.
his
Hannibal
Numidian
became the
cavalry.
proverbial condom.
He took his Numidian cavalry and he encircled them,
Yep.
as he had done with every Roman force up until that point. And Varus, idiot that he was, thought that creating a thick center would protect him or would make him a more difficult adversary for Hannibal. He played right into his hands. Hannibal saw through it immediately, employed the same exact strategy he'd employed with all of their great victories against the Romans, and he crushed them.
Yep.
Varus, I mean, props to his co-consul, because I believe his co-consul he counseled him against this course of action.
Mhm.
I'm not super sure, but I think his co-consul, I think Magnus something.
You got me. I don't know his
Oh.
I've just dropped something.
Oh no.
Ruh-roh, Raggy.
I hope it's not important. I haven't heard anything.
That's usually a good place to start. Is it important?
But I'm gonna drop some paper towels down just in case. But anyway, so Varus is, in my opinion, the worst. And this is a very difficult question because, like, although you two have come to agreement, which I think is absolutely incredible, and maybe a testament to your shared context as historians of America first and the world second,
Right.
which is no shade again. Seriously, no shade. Like, America is my nation too,
Right.
so it makes perfect sense that would be your frame of reference.
Right.
It's amazing to me that you two could come to a consensus, or at least an easy agreement, because throughout the history of humanity, countless generals, countless commanders, and especially, even if we're just counting the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire, the Roman hegemony, the Roman world, like, countless generals, countless commanders have passed into obscurity by being so shitty they're not worth a mention. and so many have passed into obscurity truly without mention, just by not being mentioned in the surviving histories and accounts we have. And more indeed have been, even in let's say the pantheon of Rome that we have been passed into obscurity through just being not so great, and we so barely remember them.
Right.
But I mean, I'm glad that you two have come to an agreement on one, and me personally, I've come to a personal consensus on an individual in the Roman Empire, again, who's, like, known, who has a name that you could say and people will be like, I've heard of that name.
Great.
Yeah.
And yet has been known as somebody who failed unconditionally.
Another thing I wanted to add, I like how the reason that these two people are viewed as the worst are for actually two completely opposite reasons. Like, for Varus, it's the fact that he didn't really do any research against his opponent, didn't analyze it at all, and just went into battle thinking he was the superior. And then McClellan doing the whole, he over-researched and over-analyzed everything to the point he was too timid to attack. I think that's kind of funny.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like two sides of the same coin kind
Right.
of thing.
And that is the impression I get of McClellan from Garrett. Like the majority of what I get from McClellan is our discussions together.
Yeah.
And my understanding of McClellan is based on this conversation right now and those discussions we've had in the past.
Yeah. I
And
mean, yeah, it really is. Yeah. Well,
and
I
yeah,
mean,
he seems to me like a guy who, much like myself, and maybe this is a very readily relatable thing, saw the world before him and saw the difficulty before him and the tasks and the challenges and the hurdles he had to overcome, and thought, who the fuck am I? And who the fuck am I, and what great challenges these are? And for that was totally hamstringed in dealing with them in a way he possibly could have. And I think he tells maybe a cautionary tale in a way that Varus maybe doesn't. And that's like, you can be the stronger force. You can see what's ahead of you and overestimate it and fail.
yeah.
Right.
And for that reason, like it's his example, and maybe the quintessential example we derive from him and interpret as the example where like you overestimate your difficulties and don't rise to the occasion, and that's what earns you a place on the list of the worst commanders of all time.
Right.
is seeing the difficulty you have ahead of you and not only failing to meet it but overestimating it such that you fail to try it, fail to really attempt it in an honest way. And I think that's powerful to me.
Right.
So I mean, if we're to vote on this, I feel like you guys are going to win, obviously. But I'd like to throw my vote in with you guys at number one as well.
Mm-hmm.
In just the moral lesson that is taught by McClellan, or at least your retelling of McClellan, as somebody who saw what difficulties he was up against and overestimated them such that he failed to even really contend against them.
Right.
Yeah. So hang on. I'm actually doing a quick search, because I want to see the casualties of Kenai versus
Oh.
McClellan.
Well,
Because I just for my own curiosity.
well, Kenai
Because
was
I think
huge.
this might help. I think this might help balance the field a little bit.
I'm sorry. So can you repeat that?
Yeah. I'm saying that I'm looking up casualties.
It's very
for the Battle of
difficult
Kenai
because
versus.
I believe the
McClellan.
Civil War is like the point in human history where the size of armies was just starting to really begin to
Right.
approach again the sizes that were fielded at the time of the Romans. And it's very difficult because the Romans absolutely exaggerated in some cases, so exact numbers are impossible.
That being said, just to throw this information, I will admit, because we were talking earlier about Hannibal, I know a little bit about the Battle of Cannae, but the Romans in that one battle had roughly 86,000 troops, and at the end of the day, only about 15,000 of them survived, so they lost
They
roughly
were
70,000 in that one
Yeah.
battle.
Which is
also
just
important to note, they were the outnumbering force in that
Yes.
engagement.
Because it was like 85 to almost only 50,000, I believe, or something like that.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure Hannibal only lost not even like he didn't even lose 10,000. I think it was like closer to 6,000 people that day.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like McClellan's casualties. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, because again, he was more conservative with his
Right.
motions. He didn't lose anywhere near as much as
No.
was lost in Cannae.
Right. But at the same time, like, that's not all you have to consider. Like,
Right.
you
Right.
have to consider a lot of things. You can consider, like, yes, the responsibility, but also the degree of failure. Like,
Yeah.
what percentage of McClellan's force did he lose?
Right.
Probably not as much as Varus
True.
lost at
Yeah.
Cannae. But at the same time, like, it was a very different situation.
Yeah.
In all of these topics and with all of these questions, we're comparing oranges to apples in a sense.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
comparing people in disparate parts of time and disparate parts of history with disparate responsibilities to one another. But I mean, that's the fun in it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
comparing Civil War heroes or would-be heroes
Right.
with Punic War heroes or
Exactly.
would-be heroes or villains.
Right.
Exactly.
And so to compare the two, I think it's difficult to really place a mathematical to really place an algorithm on it, like how many dead or how many, like what a percentage dead. I don't think those even put together really capture it.
Right.
Yeah, really capture the essence. Yeah.
I
Okay,
think it's
so I mean,
down to
are we gonna vote,
personal.
or are we just gonna
Let's
assume it's a
vote.
foregone
No,
conclusion?
let's
Sure.
vote. I mean,
All right.
I think we're gonna win. Like I'm voting personally for you guys' choice.
I also second McClellan, but
Yeah.
have you been swayed, Eric?
Well, I hate McClellan so much that I'm still gonna pick McClellan. That being said, I have a newfound, I guess, disrespect for Varys. Like that, I didn't even really consider that. I thought, Hannibal just made a good call, but you were right. He was known for encirculating. He was known for that, and there was no preparedness at all. But I'm still gonna go McClellan. But thank you for kind of.
And I wonder, like, okay, so this is the last vote we have, and we're clearly voting on McClellan,
Yep.
and this is our last question. But I want to perhaps as an ending to this episode, or a lead into the next one,
Sure.
like Eric, I'm really interested, like, how did you come to your Republican sensibilities and Republican in the classical, and rather in the mid American sense? How did you come to these sensibilities as someone who grew up or learning about the South, in the South? Like, how did you come to be a champion of the Union against the Confederates? Because
So
I'm frankly interested and impressed with your knowledge of this, and as it contrasts to my ignorance,
well, I will
and
say,
I'd love to learn more.
in regards to the South part, I only lived there from like being 18 on, so I grew up in
That's
Massachusetts.
enough. That's
Which, I
really
mean,
enough.
well, that's also because I think when I was younger, it's just, I don't know, my grandfather and my uncle were both huge into the Civil War, and I think my grandfather especially, anytime I saw him, the only thing him and me talked about, besides me helping him fix his computer, was just anything and everything about the Civil War. And it wasn't just the Union was good, the Confederacy was bad. It was the brass tacks. It was just, these are the facts. Like, and I don't know. It was so interesting that I didn't want to look when I was younger. I didn't always look at who was right, who was wrong. I looked at why people fought for what they fought for, and kind of, I guess, chose from that respect. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Liam, you got anything else to add before we sign off?
Honestly, no. I mean, I'm thrilled that we've had this conversation, and I think I'm going to put a lot more into the remaining questions we
Right.
have, and they're great questions.
Yeah.
Because honestly, Eric,
Mhm.
I'm like really so impressed and so invigorated and inspired by your appreciation and your knowledge of history as you know it. Like as you said, like this is Liam and Garrett's podcast,
Right.
and like that is true in a sense.
Mhm.
But I I don't know. I think of you as such a great resource to kind of like keep me grounded and keep Garrett accountable, because oftentimes we'll reach no seriously, we'll reach a point where Garrett says something regarding his area of expertise, which is
Yeah.
the Civil War and the American context, and I'll just be so out of the water
Right.
with my assessment of that I can't really help but agree. And so to
Right.
have somebody with that shared context
Mhm.
to contend with and or agree with his assessment of things is excellent. It's a lovely thing to have for me as an American layman. of my own history.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
also to that point,
Mhm.
Eric. I think just to piggyback on it. I mean, I really have enjoyed having you on the show. I think
Yeah.
This is tons of
your
fun.
This has been
energy has
great.
been infectious, and your ability to really. I think Liam really said it best. Really, kind of bridge the gap into
Right.
like, because there are things that like I don't know that when like is when how Liam feels about American history.
Hmm.
A lot of times I feel about classical history where
Right.
I just do not have a frame of reference.
Yeah.
I just don't have any like even if I'm going to go bullet points, I'm like, you got me, dude. I can't even like build an assumption based off of the limited thing that I know because I don't know anything. And for you to really be able to ask insightful questions that maybe I don't think of
Right.
in the moment, I think was really, really, really awesome. So we can keep talking afterward, but I just
Sure.
want to sign off real fast so we can
Yeah,
end the
yeah, I
recording.
think that's fair. I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Yeah,
Perfect.
well,
Does
hang on.
anybody
Let me
have any
sign off
final
first.
remarks? Sign
We don't want to
off.
just
Sign
end it.
off. Okay.
You dillweed. Okay, so this has been the Broken Tablets podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you stuck it out to the end, we are very, very grateful. We'll hopefully have the part 2 to this out
Bell
reasonably soon.
button. Patreon. Ah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but we don't have a Patreon or anything. We're only on SoundCloud and YouTube for now. We might get a Patreon if this actually takes off. We don't know if it does. Okay, so yeah, we're signing off. Eric, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And we will catch you all on the next one.
Yeet.
Yeet. Oh, and
Yeet.
by the way, if you're wrong and you disagree with us, you're wrong. So shove it.
Yeah, you can email us, but it's going straight to spam, and I'll personally like include your address so I can personally send you a handwritten letter about why you're wrong, why I'm right, and why we're right. Yeah,
Yes.
sorry, there are other people here. Why we're right, why you're wrong, and how much we deserve everything you've ever achieved in your life.
Boom. Get body.
And how little you deserve it personally. Anyway,
That's right.
so that's us, I guess. Signing off.
Signing off. Catch you on the next one,
It's been
folks.
a pleasure. Eric has the last word.
Yeah, you do it, Eric.
Adios. I don't know.
Boom!
Adios!
Adios!